appears as a stag. He is said to be able to make men and women fall in love and also has command over great storms. He gives true answers to all things past, present, and future, but he must first be commanded to enter a magic triangle, for if not, he will lie and deceive the conjurer. But if he enters the triangle, he will answer truly and gladly speak about divinity, the creation of the world, himself, and other fallen angels. He can also destroy all the conjurer's enemies by burning them up. And if the magician requests it, he will not suffer temptations from any spirit or in any form. Furfur can also supposedly be called upon when a mortal wishes to take vengeance on other demons. This is likely included in his capability to destroy the conjurer's enemies. And I just gotta say, how scary can a demon be if its name is literally Furfur? It sounds like a name someone would give their cat. Number 8. Beelzebub. Beelzebub is a former Serphian turned into high-ranking demon who is considered one of the 7 princes of hell and oversees the Order of the Fly. In Catholic demonology, he is sometimes considered to be one of the first 3 angels to fall from heaven, along with Lucifer and Leviathan. He is also often confused with Satan, and the 2 names can be interchanged. However, strictly speaking, they are 2 separate entities. Beelzebub is the chief lieutenant of Lucifer and is one of the most loyal. He is commonly described as placed high in the hierarchy of hell and is seen as being associated with envy. He is also the prince of false gods, and flies play a large focus in imagery detailing him. The malignant spirit can even take the form of flies, according to some. I mean, ever heard of Lord of the Flies? Yup, that's him. Number 7. Mammon. Mammon in the New Testament of the Bible is commonly thought to mean money, material wealth, or an entity that promises wealth and is associated with the greedy pursuit of gain. After the rebellion in heaven, Mammon was banished to hell, where he is the one who finds underground precious metals that his demonic companions used to build their capital city, Pandemonium, by Lucifer's order. Mammon counsels the devils to be happy with what they've got and to create a home for themselves in hell. He is one of the 7 princes of hell, each representing the 7 deadly sins. Mammon represents greed and is known as the treasurer of hell, and was said to have had dealings with the Greek deity Zeus. It is thought that when you make a deal with the devil for wealth and fame, you are making it with Mammon. Number 6. Belphegor. Belphegor is a demon lord that presides over the sin of sloth and is one of the 7 princes that rules hell. He also assists people to make discoveries. For example, he seduces people by suggesting to them ingenious inventions that will make them rich, and they wouldn't have to work hard for it. As one of the fallen angels, Belphegor was originally a member of the Order of the Principalities, and after his fall, he became a demonic counterpart to one of the 10 Sephiroth that oversee the Tree of Life. He is the biblical enemy of the 6th Sephiroth, the patron angel of beauty. It's said that if Belphegor were to become too influential in the world, then the beauty of it all would become tainted, causing ruination. Number 5. Leviathan. Leviathan became a demon of darkness and chaos and a leader of hell mentioned in the book of Enoch. Leviathan is one of Lucifer's arms and one of the many faces of the devil in Christianity. He is also the representation of the sin envy. Leviathan is a tamer of beasts, a beast collector, and an excellent strategist. He has the power to summon hellish whales that are natural inhabitants of hell and use them in battle. Leviathan appears as a huge sea beast, a very powerful species of a sea serpent dragon. This form is so colossal that it's said to be capable of frightening the bravest of men and is capable of swallowing fishing boats and even ships. Its scales are several small teeth throughout its body, similar to a shark's body. Now, in his human form, Leviathan appears as a handsome young man in his late teens. Although the appearance is similar to a human, he has fish gills on his neck and his ears are pointed. He also has a small shark-like teeth that are hidden under a thin layer of skin in his mouth. Like his name suggests, he is a very jealous person, with Lucifer often being the target though. It should be noted that Leviathan's jealousy isn't limited to only him, so you should watch out. Number 4. Lucifer. Lucifer was one of the most beautiful and indescribable beings created by God, with his wisdom and beauty being described as perfect. However, despite being considered a perfect, beautiful, and glorious being by countless angels, Lucifer was extremely proud and rebelled against his father after refusing to bow down to Adam and Eve. Therefore, Lucifer is known as the first sinner, the devil, and the adversary. Now, Lucifer didn't create any angels, only God had that power, but Lucifer did trick some of them into rebelling against God and becoming his followers, claiming that he was more powerful than God and would take God's place as the ruler of the universe. They believed him, and since then, Lucifer has used them to do his will. He's known for the deadly sin of pride, and he used his pride to persuade them. I will ascend to heaven, I will raise my throne above the stars of God, I will make myself like the Most High. Isaiah 14. Lucifer also sends the worst people up to earth to wreak havoc and terrorize everyone, as well as tries to tempt non-sinners to the dark side, so be safe. Number 3. Abaddon. Abaddon is considered the ruler of all demons in the 7th layer of hell, violence, and also the commander of the locusts of Abaddon. Now, what are the locusts? Well, they're scorpion-tailed warhorses that have a man's face with lion's teeth. They're commanded to torment anyone for 5 months who does not have the seal of God on their forehead by using their scorpion-like tails. So, yeah. He rules them. He has eyes as black as night and a huge mouth with many sharp teeth like those of a great white shark. In addition, he wears black armor and his wings have even turned dark. Abaddon is sometimes referred or foreshadowed as death, as they both are neutral entities of two opposing forces. He is also considered both an angel and demon with neutral and at times lawful agents of both heaven and hell. It is unknown where his allegiance lies. He's often bringing judgment upon people in the name of God, implying that he works for the Almighty. That being said, Abaddon has also caused events that God would never have wanted to happen, let alone the fact that Abaddon helped Lucifer during the war in heaven. Seems like he liked to play both sides. It's also said during Judgment Day he will gather the souls of the damned and carry them down to the place of God's final judgment. Number 2. Asmodeus. Asmodeus is a demon who personifies and represents lust, the sexual sin related to adultery. He is the demon who exists as the arch-rival of the angel of chastity, Gabriel.
Struggling to get more people to your website? Start using Pictory's article to video tool to easily convert your old articles into engaging new videos in minutes. Let me show you how it works. What we want is the second tool called article to video. Next, you'll need an article for your video. I'll just copy this link in the address bar and paste it in this box. Then click the proceed button to continue. Pictory is now reading the article and summarizing the top highlights. When it's done, you'll see the article and the AI highlights here on the left side of the screen. Click on the next button here. Pictory is now creating your video storyboard. The AI is analyzing the highlights from your article and is automatically selecting the visuals for each scene. This is where you could edit your scenes and captions to add even more polish to your videos. Ooh, I like that one. And don't worry, upgrading to any paid plan removes all of the watermarks on your final videos. Next, we'll add some audio. There's over 15,000 tracks available for you here. Next, you can add an AI voiceover to narrate your video for you here in the voiceover tab. Congratulations, you just turned your article into a video. Remember, your first video doesn't have to be perfect. Just do your best to make a quick video today and then come share it inside our official
Asmodeus is also referred to as one of the 7 princes of hell and represents one of the 7 deadly sins, being lust. Asmodeus is a demon of lust and is therefore responsible for twisting people's sexual desires. It is said that people who fall to Asmodeus' ways will be sentenced to an eternity in the 2nd level of hell. He is also a demon of lechery, jealousy, anger, and revenge. In hell, Asmodeus looks human, however, he has stark black eyes and 2 rows of shark teeth sticking out of his mouth. In this form, Asmodeus has no hair on his head, but has a muscular appearance from the waist up and 2 bat wings protruding from his back. From the waist down, he has what looks like kangaroo legs and a long dragon's tail. His horrible appearance is capable of causing fear and repudiation in humans who fall into hell, and that's the demon's intention. And coming up at number 1 is Satan. Satan is a prominent demon in the hierarchy of hell. He is known for bringing evil and temptation, and is known as the deceiver who leads humanity astray. Satan is even able to take control of the life of a person in the stead of God, though only to an extent to what God allows. Satan would appear to those who are sinful, playing into their hearts and towing them into despair. He may either be depicted as a rebel to the will of God, or as one who tempts mankind to commit sin to show God that mankind can easily be led astray from him. He is described as the ruler of the demons and the god of this age. In Revelation, Satan appears as a great red dragon who is ultimately banished from heaven by Michael the archangel. Satan is mostly known as the devil, and although the book of Genesis does not mention him, he is often identified with the serpent in the Garden of Eden. Satan is also said to be associated with one of the 7 deadly sins, being wrath, and is one of the 7 princes of hell.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Johann Faust. According to the stories passed down about this man, it is said that he was an alchemist and astrologer who lived in Germany during the early 1500s. It is said that in his plight to become the smartest man in the world, while also enjoying as many earthly pleasures as possible, he summoned the help of a demon named Mephistopheles. There are terrible stories about how cruel and truly evil this man was, and as a professor, it is said he looked down on everyone else. Local priests apparently believed that he had actually made a deal with the devil in which he sold his soul to him, and there are also other stories that say his pet dog was actually a demon who was able to shapeshift. During his life, he did publish several grimoires, and in 1540, while conducting some sort of alchemic experiment, his laboratory exploded. In our number 9 spot today, we have Jonathan Moulton. Jonathan is a man who was born in 1726, and he was known for his military career. He served in King George's War as well as in the French and Indian Wars, but after his service is where this story really starts. Basically, after his time fighting was over, he went on to become one of New England's wealthiest men. This caused heads to swivel and rumors to swirl because this wasn't something that was normally seen. This all gave way for the rumor that Jonathan had struck this luck of fortune because he was actually working with the devil. People began to say that for financial gain, he in turn gave his eternal devotion and even his soul over to the devil. The devil would visit him every month in order to fill up his boot with gold. You know what happens with things like this though, people get greedy. It is said that despite this lavish lifestyle he was already living, he wanted more, and this led him to make the mistake of trying to trick the devil. He cut a hole in the floor above his basement and placed a boot over it, which also had a hole in the heel. Of course, he did this so that when the devil came with the gold, he'd get a whole basement full rather than just the boot. But the devil, of course, caught on. From there, it is said that the devil burned down Jonathan's house along with all of the gold that lay inside. In our number 8 spot today, we have Niccolo Paganini. If you search people who made a deal with the devil, Niccolo is one of the first names that pops up. Niccolo was a professional violinist who was born in 1782. His parents began to send him to lessons when he was just 5 years old, and by age 15 he was already touring the world because he was so talented. What's really interesting about Niccolo and his story, other than his obvious musical genius, however, is the rumors surrounding his talent and subsequent recognition. According to some, people believe that his own mother summoned the devil in order for her son to be the extreme talent that he was. There are many modern diagnoses that could potentially explain some of what made Niccolo so talented, and I mean, we all know quite well that sometimes people are just born with extreme talent, but of course in the early 1800s, people and their imaginations certainly ran wild. The final reason why people believe he may have made a deal with the devil is because shortly before his death, he was quite sick. The doctors had a feeling he was nearing death, so they sent in a priest to pray over him. When he first saw the priest, it is said that he freaked out and sent the priest away. Many people believe that him pushing the priest away was only a confirmation of the fact that he was working with the devil. In our number 7 spot today, we have Theophilus of Adana. For this one, we are taking it back a little bit all the way to 538 AD. Theophilus of Adana was a cleric in the Roman Catholic Church. So basically, one day he was elected to become the new bishop, but he ended up denying the offer, as it is said he wanted a more priestly sort of position, instead of one that came with all of that power and responsibility. It is said that he wanted the position of archdeacon, which would have seen him controlling where the donation money went. So apparently, in passing on this bishop position, he thought that if he gave the position to his rival, then his rival should at least be grateful enough to give him the position he wanted, but of course, that did not happen. This new bishop gave away the seat that Theophilus wanted and instead gave him the position of being a humble cleric. This made Theo super angry, and this is when he thought that maybe the church isn't as holy as he once thought they were. This is when he decided to summon the help of Satan. He ended up signing a contract with Satan in his own blood. He denounced Jesus and the Virgin Mary, and it is said that, with the help of Satan, he was once again voted into the bishop position, and this time he accepted. At this point in time, it is said that he felt so guilty he confessed to this deal with the devil, and the priest who he confessed to decided that they should burn the blood-signed contract. For a second, Theo looked up, but then suddenly he collapsed and died. Many people believe that it was because he had broken his contract. In our number 6 spot today, we have Giuseppe Tartini. Giuseppe was an Italian violinist and composer who lived during the 1700s. He went on to compose a song called The Devil's Trill Sonata. Called The Devil's Trill Sonata. And not only this, but he claimed to wake up one night to find Satan sitting on the edge of his bed, playing the violin. Seems as though the devil really likes violins, apparently. What's extremely curious is after this alleged encounter, it is said that Giuseppe's violin skills hit heights never seen before. He was able to suddenly play extremely complicated trills that are impossible for most musicians. Apparently, even today, the sonata is too difficult for most musicians to play, which is why people believe that perhaps this story really was true. In our number 5 spot today, we have Urbain Grandier. Born in 1590, Urbain was a French Catholic priest who was known as being a little promiscuous with some of the nuns. Look, there's no judgment from me at all, but I'm just saying, the Catholic Church now doesn't like that. I can't imagine pre-1600s Catholic Church just being cool with that, but anyway, it is said that he actually took quite a public stance against the church's view on celibacy. Because of his escapades, there were points where people who had indulged with him were now accusing him of witchcraft and using dark magic in order to tempt them. This led to a trial, which did end in acquittal, but France's chief minister did not like Urbain at all. The priest had apparently published some less than kind criticism about him, so naturally he returned the favor and ordered a second trial. This time, Urbain was put through some grueling interrogations, and while it certainly was inhumane, it led to the discovery of quite a document.
Oh.
One that was apparently found in his belongings. It was a contract that is said to have been written in Latin and covered with strange symbols. The contract was signed by Urbain as well as several demons, including the devil himself. Basically, the contract promised him the love of women, the respect of monarchs, that sort of thing, in exchange for his allegiance to the devil. In the end, this led to Urbain being found guilty of making a deal with the devil, and he was sentenced to death. In our number 4 spot today, we have Aleister Crowley. This man is quite well known for being the leader of an occult group, and this really does stem back even into his childhood. It is said that quite early on, Aleister started calling himself the Beast and the Antichrist, and he is even quoted as saying that God and Satan fought over his soul. In one of his books, he wrote, quote, "I was in the death struggle with self. God and Satan fought for my soul those 3 long hours. God conquered. Now I have only one doubt left. Which of the twain was God?" Many people believe that perhaps he made a deal with Satan, but it is possible that these are just rumblings based on Aleister's teachings and beliefs. In our number 3 spot today, we have Jack Parsons. Jack was a man who was born just a few years prior to the Wright brothers flying the first airplane, and being born at a time like this had him growing up dreaming of and reading sci-fi novels about rocket ships taking people to space.
I said he was hyped. He had that
this
nasty
love
pizza
of
last
rocket
night.
ships and these dreams of going to space are what led him to summoning the devil in order to make a deal. Jack wanted to sell his soul in exchange for a rocket ship. This deal didn't end up working, but Jack continued to study science as he grew older. Later in life, he stumbled upon the teachings of Aleister Crowley that we just talked about, and this is when he tried his hand at summoning things again. This time he tried to summon a goddess named Babylon that was said to possibly help men get to the moon one day. Technically, in some ways, it worked, because Jack Parsons ended up helping create the jet fuel that is said to still be used today. Maybe it was his original deal with the devil, maybe it was the goddess, or maybe it was just good old passion and drive that did it. I guess that all depends on what you believe. In our number 2 spot today, we have Christoph Hasemann. Back in 1677, Christoph was an artist who was working on a castle in Austria. He was so talented at his job that he had been commissioned by the nobles to do this work. There were rumblings about how he may have sold his soul to the devil, but no one was sure of it until it is said that Christoph confessed. He said he had 9 years prior and that he regretted it very much now and actually wanted an exorcism. They demanded to know if he was a practicing witch, but in the end it was decided that he was not, and that instead the devil just had a really strong hold on him. The local priest began giving Christoph exorcisms, and during these sessions, Christoph explained that he had these intense visions where he was coming face to face with the devil, who was in the form of a dragon.
That's what I have to
The
do.
dragon was holding the contract that held Christoph's soul, and this is when he was able to rip it out of the dragon's talons. When he woke up, it seemed as though he was cured. After this, he began painting pictures of the devil, and he even painted a story with multiple panels that told the story of how he sold his soul and how they helped him get it back. In our number 1 spot today, we have Antoine Rose. This woman from the 15th century is often credited with our modern day image of a witch riding on a broomstick. She became known as the Witch of Savoy, and she is said to have confessed to regularly meeting with the devil. I mean, let's be honest, history doesn't exactly have a good record with those accused of witchcraft, so it isn't quite clear if this deal with the devil was real, or if perhaps Antoine could just, like, add 1 + 1, and then suddenly she was accused of being a witch and had to find a way to try and defend herself. Legend goes that she was in a position where she was in dire need of money, and when she asked her neighbor for help, they led her to a group of people who convinced her to ask the devil for help. When the devil appeared, he agreed to help her, of course, in exchange for her rejection of God and her promise to worship him. Story has it that she said the devil had a low, raspy voice when he appeared to her in human form, and she also apparently said that she was quite afraid of him, which, I don't know, personally makes a lot of sense.
Number 10, The Violinist. It's been long said that successful artists have made a deal with the devil, and this has been going on for hundreds of years. An Italian violinist named Giuseppe Tartini claimed the devil appeared to him in a dream and played for him the most incredible piece of music he had ever heard. Here is how he described the experience. One night in the year 1713, I dreamed I had made a pact with the devil for my soul. Everything went as I wished. My new servant anticipated my every desire. Among other things, I gave him my violin to see if he could play. How great was my astonishment on hearing a sonata so wonderful and so beautiful, played with such great art and intelligence as I had ever even conceived in my boldest flights of fantasy. Upon waking, Giuseppe tried to recreate it, and that became his magnum opus, known as the Devil's Trill Sonata. Number 9, Exorcism Gone Wrong. In 1997, Father Gabriel Amorth conducted his exorcisms in Rome, and he asked for the help of Jesus, and the young man he was dealing with began to curse and spit, and started using English instead of his native Italian. Screaming and howling, the demon burst forth and looked straight at him, drooling saliva from the young man's mouth. Father Gabriel said he returned fire with prayers and other ritual recitations, demanding that the demon reveal its name. He said, "Unclean spirit, whoever you are and all your companions who possess the servant of God, I command you, tell me your name, the day and the hour of your damnation." The man fixed him with a glare, snarled, and said, "I am Lucifer." Father Gabriel was shocked. He did not expect to receive such a terrifying response. The father mostly used prayers as his weapon, reciting verses of liberation from the Roman rite of exorcism. As Father Gabriel continually commanded the demon to leave the host, it eventually left, but my goodness, that sounds absolutely terrifying. Number 8, Witch Trials. Sarah Good was one of the first 3 women to be accused of witchcraft in the Salem witch trials, which occurred in 1692 in Massachusetts. On March 25th, 1692, Sarah was tried for witchcraft, and when she was brought in, the accusers immediately began to rock back and forth and moan, seemingly in response to Sarah's presence. Later in the trial, one of the accusers fell into a fit. Now, Sarah denied the allegations against her, but another woman on trial admitted to being the devil's servant. She stated that a tall man dressed in all black came to them, demanding they sign their names in a great book. Although initially refusing, she eventually wrote her name after Sarah, and another woman forced her to. When Sarah was allowed the chance to defend herself in front of the 12 jurors in the Salem Village Meeting House, she argued her innocence, proclaiming that the other 2 were the real witches. In the end, however, Sarah was convicted of witchcraft and sentenced to death. So, did she really meet the devil, or was she innocent? Who knows? Number 7, Strayed from the Path. This is the testimony of Jennifer Perez, who was brought up in a Christian home. She strayed from that path, got into drugs, died, and was sent to hell. Fortunately, she was given a second chance, but this is her story. She was in the hospital and her spirit woke up, but her body didn't. As a spirit, 2 men dressed in red approached her and told her to come with them. She went to hell.
Submarine spotted. Attention, reporting the target position.
Heaven and saw the Lord and two angels, Gabriel and Michael. She and Gabriel went through a black door and it was dark and they were falling. The farther they fell, the hotter it was, and she said it smelled like sulfur. They got to the bottom and she realized that she was in hell, seeing people being tortured by various demons. The cries and torture scared her, and then she saw a massive red creature in the middle of it all, just watching everything. She assumed that this was the devil and it terrified her. After this, she then ascended back to heaven and was asked for a second chance. She then woke up in the hospital, alive, and devoted the rest of her life to God. Number 6.
I don't know if you can hear me or not, but I just beat the
A user
fake
on
spirit
Reddit
of the
posted
wind.
this story about the time their mother met the devil. They said, my mom told me a story of when
got
she
a
met the devil. She was in high school, she had a friend who
I
was
bet
dating
this
an older
statue
man. He was probably 20 to 30 years older than her, and he gave her a necklace. Not wanting to get caught by her parents, she gave the necklace to my mom. She wore it, and that night when my mom slept, she dreamt of a man. Clean cut and handsome, but disturbingly evil. She said all she knew about the man was that he was pure evil. He came up to her face, eyes locked on her, stone cold and expressionless, reached for her neck and grabbed the necklace from her neck and twirled it in a circle in the air like a witch's pendant. She jolted awake and couldn't feel the necklace, and in a panic she looked all around for the necklace and found it under her pillow in a perfect spiral. Number 5. TikTok doctor.
I just did
Once
that.
a man who was pronounced dead by his doctor after being injured said that rather than seeing a bright light and the feeling of coming home, he instead saw hell itself and met the devil. A doctor took to TikTok to explain that he encountered a young man in his early 20s who'd been stabbed in the heart after being involved in a deal that went wrong. Not willing to let the man die, medical staff took the victim into surgery, kept him from losing too much blood, and treated the wound in his heart. The doctor remembers the man waking up 4 hours later and crying, claiming that he went straight down to hell and looked straight in the eyes of the devil. The man said he could see the doctors working to save his life, and having never prayed before, gave it a try, at which point an angel pulled him back up out of hell. Remembering how clear the man had been, the doctor said it was the most amazing experience because he was legit. I mean, nobody makes up an experience like that. The last I heard, he's completely changed his life, he gave his life to God, and I still to this day, the look in his eyes when he woke up, the terror, I'm absolutely convinced he did meet the devil. Number 4. Working for the devil. Gilles de Rais was originally hailed a hero of France for his role in the 100 Years' War, a time during which he served as a comrade in arms to Joan of Arc, but the nobleman Gilles de Rais lived a secret, gruesome second life where he enjoyed ending the lives of people who couldn't defend themselves. In September 1440, de Rais was arrested after an almost decade-long spree in which he may have ended the lives of over 140 victims. During his trial, both de Rais and several of his servants/accomplices confessed to their evil deeds. Besides ending people's lives, he also admitted to engaging in Satanism by reportedly summoning the devil and his demonic minions. While the nobleman refused to sell his soul, he offered the blood and organs of his victims in exchange for knowledge and power over the dark arts. Number 3. God wanted her to see hell. Josefa Menendez was a young Spanish sister who had a short religious life of great suffering and experienced many revelations throughout her life. More than once, she was taken to hell to witness and feel the suffering firsthand. Sister Josefa was reluctant to write on the subject of hell, and did so only to conform to her Lord's wishes. She wrote about her experiences in her journal, and she described it as the greatest torment of hell, namely the soul's inability to love. She wrote, "One of these damned souls cried out, 'This is my torture, that I want to love and cannot. There is nothing left me but hatred and despair. If one of us could so much as make a single act of love, but we cannot, we live on hatred." As mentioned, she went to hell multiple times, but one time she saw the devil. She wrote, "Souls were crying out, and the devil answered, 'Insinuate yourselves by including carelessness in them, but keep in the background so that you are not found out. Tempt these others into ambition, into self-interest, to acquiring wealth without working, whether it be lawful or not." That entry was from February 3rd, 1923. She visited hell many times after that, but didn't report on seeing the devil again. And that sounds absolutely terrifying. Number 2. In a coma. Will Carroll is a drummer who has been in the band Death Angel since 2009 and has provided the drum tracks for their last 4 studio albums. After spending nearly 2 weeks in a coma fighting Will revealed that during his battle with the virus, he saw the afterlife,
Maybe
where
this
he would be
how
sent to
we
hell and meet Satan. The illness left him in a critical state where he was put on a ventilator while lying unconscious in a California Pacific Medical Center hospital bed for 12 days before recovering. He said that the devil would punish him for the deadly sin of sloth. The musician said Satan would transform him into a creature similar to that of Star Wars' Jabba the Hutt, and that he would vomit blood until he ultimately had a heart attack. Will told the San Francisco Chronicle that what he went through allowed him to change some of his typical lifestyle habits, including his once heavy alcohol and illegal substance use. I'm also going to listen to satanic metal though, he joked, but he later admitted that after beating COVID-19, he doesn't think Satan's quite as cool as he used to. And coming up at number 1, The Devil Made Me Do It. Sound familiar? It's because the third Conjuring movie has the same title. This film is inspired by the real events that took place with Arnie Johnson. Ed and Lorraine Warren were helping exorcise a possessed boy named David Glatzel in the early 80s. David's family had seen him being beaten and choked by invisible hands, and that red marks had appeared on his neck afterwards. David had started to growl, hiss, speak in otherworldly voices, and recite passages from the Bible as well. They did many exorcisms on David, and Lorraine said that David levitated, ceased breathing for a time, and even demonstrated the supernatural ability of precognition. During his exorcisms, there was also a rocking chair in the room that would allegedly rock on its own, levitate, and even vanish and reappear. David and Lorraine also claimed to have seen the devil sitting in it. Arnie then coerced one of the demons to possess him while participating in one of David's exorcisms. Afterwards, Arnie's personality changed. He would fall into a trance-like state where he would growl and hallucinate, but later have no memory of it. Then one day, his and his girlfriend Debbie's landlord was drunk and misbehaving, so Ernie ended his life. The day after the incident, Lorraine Warren informed the Brookfield police that Ernie was possessed when the crime was committed. The case then went on to trial, where Ernie's defense was demonic possession and the devil made me do it. The jury deliberated for 15 hours over 3 days before convicting Ernie of first-degree manslaughter. He was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison, though he only served 5.
Number 10, Will Carroll. Will Carroll, the drummer of the band Death Angel, caught COVID-19 at the end of his band's European tour. It was a long, hard battle, and thankfully, Carroll was able to come back from it. But the battle along the way may have included an encounter with Satan himself. The virus put him in a critical state, which involved Carroll lying unconscious in his hospital bed for 12 days straight. In an interview with San Francisco Chronicle, though, Will revealed that those 12 days were spent in a peaceful dream state. In his dreams, or I would call them nightmares, the devil would punish him repeatedly for the sin of sloth. The devil would apparently turn him into a bulbous-like creature and make him puke blood until his heart gave out. These were the dreams he was having over and over again.
Are you struggling to become a successful trader? What if I told you I make between $1,000 to $15,000 a day, repeating the same steps every day? That's right, I do this one strategy. Basically, all I have to do is find a trend, and regardless if the market is going up or down, I get paid. And with my profits from this, I've been able to retire my wife and spend every day with my 2 boys at home. I first learned how to do this 5 years ago from my mentor. He was trading for just a few hours a day, and he was making even more than I was as a full-time engineer working 60 hours a week. So I saw this, and I said, I could do that.
Recovering from the disease, needless to say, Carroll has changed his lifestyle habits. For more reason than this one, it appears recovering from this awful virus we all hate definitely felt like returning from hell. Maybe the virus is from there too. Wouldn't be surprised, to be honest. Number 9, Giuseppe Tartini. Everybody wants to be the best at something, but for Tartini, the best just wasn't good enough. Tartini was born on April 8th, 1692, and the guy might as well have been born with a violin in his hand. He was brilliant, a brilliant musician and composer, and he thought so too, until one day he heard someone playing the instrument he dedicated his life to with a kind of expertise that he had never heard. This sent him spiraling, and for 12 days, Tartini locked himself away, practicing all hours of the day. While he drove himself mad, the devil decided to pay a visit to a desperate soul in a dream. He offered to make Tartini the most masterful violinist in the world in exchange for his soul.
Like the wise guy he was, he asked for a demonstration. So the devil picked up the instrument and played a sonata with ease and beauty like nothing he'd ever heard before. When Giuseppe awoke, he scrambled to write down the sonata, which has become easily one of his most popular pieces of work. Its name? The Devil's Trill, and I listened to it and it is beautiful. For his entire career though, Tartini remained frustrated with the piece as he was never able to play it exactly as he had heard it. This story is a reminder to never make a deal with the devil, as you never really get what you asked for. Number 8, Rose la Tulipe. It appears that the devil and the violin kind of go hand in hand. The story of Rose la Tulipe is a famous French-Canadian story and one of my absolute favorites. The woman who shared this story with me swears it was true, and I can't help but believe it either. Rose begged her father to host a dance on the eve of Lent, and he agreed, but with one condition, that at midnight the dancing had to stop. Dancing wasn't allowed during Lent, so if they continued, they would be sinning. Rose agreed, and everyone came to join on the night, and Rose danced with anyone who would, even with other men, though she was engaged. Then at 11 p.m. a knock came at the door, and the priest opened it to reveal a dazzlingly handsome stranger, and Rose fell hard. The priest welcomed him and requested that he take off his hat, shoes, and jacket, all of which the man refused, saying he wasn't staying long. He immediately swept Rose in a dance and asked no one else for the remainder of the evening. As soon as midnight hit, the dancing stopped, but the man whispered in her ear, "Just one last dance, my Rose." With struggles she resisted, but suddenly her feet, bewitched it seemed, began dancing without her. The man then kissed her, and the spark from their kiss set the house ablaze. The next morning, Rose was found mumbling around the ashes, now mysteriously an old woman, the devil having taken part of her soul with him. I know, that sounds like a legend, but like, thanks for indulging me because I really love that story and I want an opportunity to tell it, so here it is. Other versions say that she actually got taken back to hell with him, and another is that her mother came and saved her. A whole bunch of stuff, but I think that one's my favorite. Okay, number 7, Richard Cable. Richard Cable might as well have been the devil himself. A squire at Brooke Manor in Devon, England in the 1600s, he was known as a monstrously cruel man. He abused his wife, and one night she escaped him with him hot on her heels. He killed her and her faithful dog, but little did the man know that that dog would haunt him for the rest of his days, and there would be many. At least that's what Cable thought. Cable had made a deal with the devil to live forever, but mysteriously, Cable passed away in 1677. But it appears the devil did give him everlasting life, as a spirit walking the moors at night, forever being chased by a herd of hounds. The locals even put iron bars around his tomb because there were so many sightings of him wandering around the moors. Instead, now, a red glow occasionally emits from his resting place, and the howls of demons are said to gather, waiting to claim his soul for their master. Number 6, Saint Dunstan. Saint Dunstan was a saint who lived in 900s, and for some reason the devil loved to visit him. He was a talented metalsmith, and one day an old man requested that he make a chalice for him. Dunstan agreed, but when he looked back up at the old man, he had shifted into a woman, and then very suddenly a boy. Immediately he knew it was the devil, but fearing his wrath, concealed his distress and crafted the chalice. Subtly though, he put his blacksmith tongs in the fire, and quick as he could, he thrust the tongs onto Satan's nose and cast him from the cell. That wouldn't be the last time he saw the devil though. Dunstan would face him once again and attack the devil by hammering into his hoof, and only agreed to remove it if the devil agreed never to cross a threshold where a horseshoe hung. And that's why today horseshoes are considered good luck, so take a lesson from that. Number 5, A Boy Named Scott. An article written by Richard J. Bonifant recounts several near-death experiences in order to try and see similarities. Some usually describe a light or a tunnel, but after a little boy named Scott got into an accident, he may have met something much darker. On June 10th, 1995, Scott and his family were enjoying getting ice cream from the ice cream truck, as you do, but Scott was so excited he ran out from behind the truck and he got hit by another motorist. He was almost declared dead, but 8 hours later, thankfully, he awoke in intensive care. The weirdest part was that he described in perfect detail what had happened to him as if he was watching from across the street. He knew every single detail. It was really freaky. Even recalled trying to give his dad a hug, but passing right through him. The scariest thing though was who he ended up meeting. He suddenly faced a dark vortex and felt himself being drawn into it by the haunting, putrid image of the devil. Scott said he looked like a man made of rotting flesh, and he tried to grab Scott, but he was whisked away into a tunnel of light. So it was kind of like the devil's trying to steal him from God. I'm glad things ended well for the little boy, getting to be with his family again, but still, not something anyone wants to see in the afterlife. Number 4, Dr. Paul Thigpen.
All of a sudden, I felt as if the darkness had filled my whole body, and that there was maybe a little part of it that was still me.
That was a clip of an interview with Dr. Paul Thigpen, who despite being raised under a Christian household, became an atheist before he was even 12 years old. That is until one day he was hanging with his friends when he was around 17 by the water in the front seat of a car. All 3 of them were squished in, and a palpable darkness began pressing into the top of his head, all the way to the bottom of his toes. He said it took over the majority of his body, and though he'd become an atheist, he didn't drink or do drugs, so we know this isn't a psychedelic experience, but his body suddenly felt like a kind of superhuman strength taking over him. A voice in his head whispered, "I'm throwing you into the water." To this day, Dr. Paul can't swim, and his body started moving across his friend's seat to leave the car. He knew he was going to die. Then he heard another voice that said, "Focus on the cross." He suddenly remembered the cross his girlfriend gave him, so he grabbed it, and meanwhile his friends were like freaking out. After holding the cross for a while, he said the darkness subsided, and when he told his friend what had happened, he said, "That's strange. The same thing happened to my girlfriend." He sought counsel from another friend who without a doubt said that he'd been visited by the devil. Later he discovered that his girlfriend's friend was a witch, and that kind of pointed all the arrows in that direction, so who knows. Was it a demon or in fact the devil? Either way, something changed his mind. Watch the rest of the interview and decide for yourself. Number 3, the man with the glowing eyes. Reddit user Dabby_U_69 had an experience as a kid that I don't think anyone could be the same after. They grew up in a pagan household, which apparently meant you saw a lot of weird stuff. But one day, on a Tuesday in the afternoon, she was playing with the daughter of a family friend who they called Jay, just outside as you do. So they're just playing, and then all of a sudden Jay just stops dead in her tracks and points behind her. She froze and then turned around slowly to see, and I quote, "a tall shadow man about 6-7 feet tall in a trench coat and hat. The scariest thing about him was his eyes. Oh God, his eyes. Huge, red, and glowing circles, but its actual eyes were small, bloodshot, and his pupils were tiny. The man reportedly tried to strangle them, but they bolted too quick for that detour."
Yeah.
Lease the new 2024 Seltos LX for $229 a month.
What's that?
Always dry scoop before you run. The hot dog diet got me shredded.
The world is full of health experts. It's time we listen to science. One a day is formulated with B vitamins to help convert food into fuel. Science that matters.
The house. Once they told their moms, they in turn freaked out because apparently at the same time the man appeared, the TV had turned long static. They brought in a psychic who said, "My love, the devil is here and he wants to hurt you. He was sent by someone, but we don't know who." The woman then gave a crystal bottle filled with sage and lavender along with something else to ward him off, and apparently the bottle is running out. So I hope she's okay. Number 2, Father Gabriel Amorth. Father Gabriel Amorth was the official exorcist for the Diocese of Rome and claimed to have performed 60,000 exorcisms before he died in 2016. But one day in 1997 he encountered a spirit he never thought he'd see. A slim young peasant man was escorted to a small room where Father Amorth waited him. Immediately he knew something was wrong. He requested the help of Jesus, and as soon as he did, the man began to spit and curse in English, which wasn't a language the man was known to speak. But then the man was seething with anger and drool dripped from his mouth as he stared down the father. He tried to attack him, but the exorcist held him back with prayers, demanding the demon reveal its name. He called out, "Unclean spirit, whoever you are, and all your companions who possess this servant of God, I command you, tell me your name, the day and the hour of your damnation." The man snarled, and what came out next paralyzed him. Dripping evil, the man said, "I am Lucifer." He continued fighting the devil with prayer, and the windows formed ice crystals as he did so. The man also bent backwards for 25 minutes, howling at him, then began hovering at 3 feet in the air. Was it him? We don't know. We just don't know, but it certainly sounds like it. Number 1, last but not least, we kind of have to talk about this because I think a bunch of people saw the devil here. Castle Huska is one of the creepiest places in the world as it was specifically built to keep the devil inside. Legend says that the castle was built over a gateway to hell. From afar, it looks like a typical old castle until you get closer. The castle wasn't built to be lived in, as evident by the fake windows and doors. Though there's a way inside, people don't recommend you step foot in there. In 878 AD, winged beast and half-human creatures spilled from the gateway and terrorized the people in the village. Somehow they held them off long enough to build the place, but they were still curious. When construction first began, prisoners in the village would be offered a pardon if they agreed to be lowered by rope into the hole. The first man to attempt it is said to have met the devil himself while he was down there. He was tied up and slowly lowered. After a few moments in the darkness, the man began screaming and begged to be pulled up. By the time they hauled him up, he looked as though he aged 30 years. His hair was white, his skin creased and speckled. They tried to discover what he had seen, but the man was incoherent and was later put into an insane asylum before dying 2 days later.
Starting at number 10, the door to hell in Turkmenistan. In Turkmenistan, the Karakum Desert, there is a crater that just won't stop burning. It is now known as the Door to Hell, and it's a 230-foot wide crater that was formed about 50 years ago when Soviet scientists were searching for oil. Basically, back in 1971, their drilling platform collapsed and it formed a crater, and then it turns out they accidentally hit a methane reserve, and so that was sending the dangerous gas into the air, so they set the crater on fire to burn the methane. And then that original burning has remained ever since, so now it just looks like this giant burning crater in the ground, and yeah, it looks like an entrance to hell. Like, you can just picture that happen, and then the devil's just clapping, being like, it just looks like a doorway. Burning. But on to number 9, Route 666. Now, the name of this road has been changed since, you know, the name, and it's been changed to Route 491 because of those issues, because yeah, there's issues associated with having the number 666 in the route. And so the so-called Devil's Highway, as, you know, some have called it, it was named because it was the 6th spur off Route 66. And so as time progressed on and accidents happened on the road, both fatal and non-fatal, people began to blame the road's name and not other factors in these accidents. And so it's said that the Najavo people of the area believe that legends like skinwalkers live around the barren stretches of the road and they step into oncoming traffic. But skinwalkers aren't the only thing rumored to be around there. There are strange disappearances, rumors of hellhounds that keep pace with vehicles no matter how fast they go, and even a haunted semi-truck associated. Like, the semi-truck would appear in front of the cars and try to run them off the road going in the opposite direction. And, you know, with the number being it, they say that it's the devil being associated with it that brings the devil and these deeds closer, you know, to the surface, and that led to the name change to Route 491. On to number 8, Devil's Hole in Death Valley. This fissure, called the Devil's Hole, is located just over the Funeral Mountains from Death Valley. And so, devil, funeral, death. You already have 3 reasons to just avoid this area. Now, the Devil's Hole is a gateway to a system of flooded caverns that is just not entirely mapped out underground. And so yeah, it's not been fully explored, but that's not to say people haven't tried exploring it. So a few people have died trying to explore it because it's said to be, well, starting like this, it kind of funnels out and there's little pockets of air so people can get lost pretty easily. And so as unique as this place is, it did catch the attention of a convicted cult leader by the name of Charles Manson. I don't know if you've heard. He believed that the waters that flooded the underground caverns were blocking a doorway to some sort of underground kingdom that would provide water and shelter for his group. And while that's never been confirmed as a possibility, the Devil's Hole is home to something in that sense. It's home to the endangered pupfish, aka the Death Valley pupfish. It's kind of cute on an unrelated note. To number 7, Diana's Punch Bowl. And so the name Diana's Punch Bowl seems, you know, pretty chill, but it's also known as the Devil's Cauldron. And so it gets that name because it's a giant boiling hot spring in Nevada. Well, it's hard to get there because it's only accessible by a 35-mile gravel road that can sometimes be kind of muddy. When you get there, it's kind of like awestruck and like
cool. Basically, it's a cup-shaped depression in the ground about like 600 feet across, and it has a steaming, bright blue pond of hot water. And so I'm guessing the devil in this name comes from just how hot the hot water in the hot spring is. Hot, hot, hot. A usual hot tub ranges from about 100 to 104 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's just like a nice temperature to, you know, bathe in or whatever. But this pool of hot water and its temperature ranges between 140 and 180 degrees Fahrenheit. So if a traveler ever decided to, you know, take a little bit of a dip, they would get burned, because this is nearly boiling water. That's, you know, Devil's Cauldron. I wasn't able to find why it's called Diana's Punch Bowl, but maybe Diana makes a really good punch, or she makes a really bad punch, and that's why they wanted to associate it with Diana. But yeah. So this next one is what happens if you mix the name Devil's Cauldron and Diana's Punch Bowl together. At number 6 is the Devil's Punch Bowl. So in Aspen, the Roaring Fork River pours into a natural rock bowl, and the effect is a bubbling cauldron, and it tends to attract the likes of cliff divers. The one thing is, you kind of have to be warned if you're thinking of going cliff diving here, because, you know, whenever the devil is in the name of something, you can tell there should be a warning there, and it's not for no good reason. So quite a few divers have unfortunately met their end in this area because of the pull of the river, and people kind of underestimate it. The most recent instance of this was back in 2014, and the water moves quickly, and a person can get caught in the pull and, you know, stuck with their head underwater, and that is what happened in this instance.
Have you ever felt a growing sense of hope in a new day? Like when the dawn light breaks and the world wakes up. We feel that every day because we know that light changes everything. It opens.
In this case, in 2014, a man did save his wife from drowning, but only to be pulled back into the river's current. He couldn't get himself to safety before the river took him away, and he ended up drowning before anyone could come to his help. The location of this Devil's Punch Bowl is about 35 miles down the road from any cell service, so it was hard to get any help called, though someone did try. So cliff diving is no joke, and anytime you see devil in the name, be warned. At number 5, Devil's Sinkhole in Texas. According to local lore by a pioneer by the name of Eamon Billings, when he discovered this sinkhole in 1867, he called it the outlet to hell, the devil's own sinkhole, and from there the name kind of stuck. It makes sense. It's a bat-infested sinkhole in Texas, home to 3 million bats, and, you know, bats come across pretty scary. Now, while the lore insinuates that the sinkhole is a mystery created by the devil himself, the science of the hole points to something else: water. Research indicates that groundwater created a cavity below the surface of the ground, and when the water drained, the ceiling of the cavern just left with it. This created the Devil's Sinkhole. And when it comes to spooky things there, 3 people unfortunately have died in the sinkhole because it used to be explored by quite a bit of treasure hunters and artifact seekers before it was closed for the safety of the people and the conservation efforts of the bats that live there. At number 4, the Devil's Kitchen. Now, this is touted as the creepiest corner of the New York State, the Devil's Kitchen, and it has more than just hiking, cycling, and ice climbing. It has an abandoned hotel, ghost stories, and unexplained lights on the trail too. But first, let's talk about the name. Why kitchen? I want to know. Now, the devil in the name comes from the unfortunate amount of hiking accidents and deaths, and the kitchen part of the name is a little bit different in its origination. Stories say that people thought the boulders at the bottom of the gorge were the kitchenware of the devil, possibly because there were cauldron-like pools of water at the base of these boulders. But let's talk about what you want to hear. What are these ghostly lights? Well, stories say that some miners passed away in the nearby mine, and the lights are from the ghosts swinging their lanterns from side to side. So when passersby see this, they think it might be someone else, but it's just a mysterious light with no person around. But let's move on to number 3, the Gomantong Caves in Sabah, Malaysia. Now, while the devil isn't in the name of this place, it's known to be a part of the experience. Sure, there's beauty in the limestone walls being over 300 feet tall in some places, but there are many creatures you may not be a fan of that call this place home. So there's crabs, so, you know, not bad. Snakes, which can be cute, but, you know, mixed opinions. And then scorpions, which is just a no from me. But there's even more. There are more than 2 million bats living in the Gomantong Caves, which leave their bat guano all over the ground. And so don't slip, because the hand railings there have just as many bat droppings on them as the floor, and once you fall to the ground, you may come face to face with some cockroaches, and there are several million of those roaches scurrying around, and guess what? That's not even my biggest fear about this place. Basically, Satan himself lives within the infamous giant Scutigera centipede. That's a centipede that's at least 3 inches long and is poisonous. and like sent to me. It's a no from me, okay? So let's go to number 2, a Google Maps pentagram. In a corner of Kazakhstan, 12 miles away from the closest settlement, is something that shows up as a clear 5-pointed star in a circle. A pentagram can be seen as a symbol of Baphomet, a deity associated with the devil. And people think this might be a mystery associated with the devil, but then others say, no, it's just a park by a lake that happens to be in the form of a star with a circle around it, and there's like nothing creepy about it at all, but I don't know, I'm not totally convinced. So let's go on to number 1, the Blood Falls. Now, Taylor Glacier in Antarctica looks absolutely horrifying. Let your mind wander for a moment, looking at just how gory it looks. Yeah, so very gory, but completely natural. It's a horrifying prank thanks to Satan. So about 5 million years ago, the glacier sealed off a lake with really high, rich microbes in it, and without light and oxygen making its way through the water, it just became more and more concentrated. So the salt levels skyrocketed, iron levels through the roof, and then it starts seeping out of this fissure in the glacier, and when it sees the light of day, the salt keeps it from freezing so it remains a liquid, and the iron gives it its bloody hue so it just looks like blood is spurting out of this waterfall. And so with all that science,
Yeah,
still
but
looks
which order?
absolutely horrifying to me, like a blood waterfall. Like it was used in The Shining, like blood coming out of, you know, an elevator, and so the devil decided like, haha, no, I see what you're doing, but like, what if I did that?
Number 10, Richard Cabell. This man lived in Devon, England during the 1600s and was apparently a huge dirtbag. He would torment people in his town and even abuse his wife. One night, in a violent rage, he struck his wife and she tried to escape. He then hunted her down and killed her and her dog. We all know what happens next. People believe that he felt he had the freedom to treat everyone horribly because he made a deal with the devil for immortality. But he did eventually die on July 5th, 1677. After he died, there were reports of a ghostly figure walking around the gravesite. This freaked out the locals so much, so they put a giant slab of stone on top of his grave, as well as encased the tomb with metal bars. And it was said that at night you could see a ghostly figure that kind of looked like a beast with glowing red eyes. Some people thought that it was Satan looking for the soul that belonged to him. Number 9, the carpenter. The devil's weaved into history in so many different places. This ancient tale comes from a village called Tyrol in Austria. The legend has it that the locals had a well-traveled bridge that they used to cross from their village to a village called Schruns. One day, the bridge was destroyed in a massive flood. The villagers were very distressed, so they got help from a local carpenter. They told him that if he could rebuild the bridge in 3 days, they would pay him a huge amount of money. He knew such a task would be impossible, so he asked the villagers if he could have a day to think about it in order to come up with a solution. That night, when he was trying to find a way to build the bridge in such a short period of time, he was visited by a man with a little green hat. I love how these stories just have some creepy dude that shows up to your house in the middle of the night, and you're like, I wonder what he wants. It couldn't be anything bad. Well, the little man told the carpenter that he would build the bridge for him, and he could keep all the money. The only thing he wanted in return was the soul from the first person to leave this house and cross the bridge. The carpenter knew this was the devil, so he had a plan. The next day, the bridge was built and the carpenter showed up. The devil saw him there and was jumping in excitement to get his prize. Then the carpenter pushed a goat onto the bridge and said, "Here's your soul." You got played, dude. Legend says the devil took the goat and people started roasting him as he was walking around with the goat. People were like, "Hey, you should have read the fine print. Oh, you two look like a great couple." I just love the idea of people roasting the devil. Like, oh, Prince of Darkness can't trick a tradesman. Number 8, George Lukens. Back in the day, if you got sick, you kind of had 2 options. You either got sicker and died, or you could go to a church and get an exorcism. On May 31st, 1788, George Lukens wasn't feeling too hot. He had started having convulsions, and it was reported that he would yell in a voice that didn't sound human. So he went to the doctor, but after trying almost everything, the doctors couldn't cure him of whatever his ailment was. So he had plan B. He went to see Reverend Easterbrook to get his soul washed. The Reverend tried to help George, but it seemed that what was tormenting him was too strong for just him. So he brought in 6 other priests to perform a super exorcism. The 7 of them took their combined power to cleanse George. During the process, he changed through 7 different demonic personalities, one of which claimed to be the devil. After the super exorcism, George was cured. And probably didn't live past 35 because that's how life went back then. Number 7. the Codex Gigas. Would you read a book that might have been written by the devil? I think that one's a hard pass for me. I'll stick to reading the back of cereal boxes. Well, the Codex Gigas is said to have the devil's actual handwriting, and whoever reads it becomes cursed. Why would you read that? I don't know if I believe that the devil's handwriting is in the book, but I wouldn't want to be wrong just for some.
Stop posting long videos on social media. Nobody's watching them. Here's how to get more views. Highlight videos and short clips are exploding in popularity. So, turn your long videos into short highlight videos just like the pros do. You see these in your social feeds every day because they work. You can now make engaging highlight videos in minutes with just a few clicks. This online video editor makes it easy. To create a highlight video, choose the Edit Videos Using Text tool and upload your video. Now quickly go through and make any edits to your video. We covered video editing in detail in our last tutorial. Next, you have two ways to highlight your video. First, you can use AI to highlight your video for you. Just select the video length you'd like to use from this drop-down menu. Pictory then automatically highlights the most interesting parts of the video, but I like to choose my highlights myself. To do that, scroll through your transcript or search for key moments and phrases. When you select your text, a pop-up menu will appear. Then click Add to Highlights. You can review your list of highlights here at the top and remove the ones you don't need. Then preview your highlight video here on the right. Pro tip: I like to keep my highlights under 1 minute. You can see your video runtime displayed here under the preview video. I also prefer to use the square 1:1 video format for posting on social media. You can instantly change the video format by selecting it in this drop-down menu in the top right corner. And you should always include subtitle captions for social posts. You'll see those controls on the right under the preview video. Once you're happy with your video, you can click the Download Highlights Video button in the top right corner. And that's it. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to see our latest product features and tutorials.
Light reading. The story goes that back in 1523, Ludovico Spoleto wanted to make the best spaghetti ever, so he summoned the devil. Nah, I'm just kidding. He wanted to answer a series of questions he'd been asked. Exam season is very tough. It's documented that the devil possessed him, grabbed a pen, and started writing. Most of the text has never been decoded except for one sentence that says, "I think it smells like updog." Number 6. Through the Window. This one was written by Redditor Gayreka. It's a story his father told him about when his dad was growing up. He said that when his dad and uncle were younger, his uncle was a bit of a rebellious kid. Never listened, would stay up late, draw dicks on everything. His father told him that it was a big problem, that his uncle was constantly challenging authority and would get in fights with his parents all the time. Well, one night, the whole family heard a blood-curdling scream come from his uncle's room. The family rushed in there and his uncle was freaking out. He said there was a man standing outside his window. Their father went to check for someone but couldn't find anything. His uncle describes the man as wearing a long trench coat and having no face except for glowing red eyes. After this, his uncle was as sweet as pie, became a respectful member of society. So was this a devil encounter? Or was this a story a father told his son so he wouldn't act up? That's healthy parenting. Scare him psychologically, but he'll be a good kid. Number 5, Michael Scott.
No, God!
Not the hilarious character from The Office. Michael Scott was a Scottish mathematician born in 1175 and is considered one of the most brilliant men to come out of Scotland. He traveled through Europe and eventually ended up in Italy. While in Italy, his brilliance didn't go unnoticed. He gained the attention of Emperor Frederick II. Frederick brought Michael into his court as the head astrologer. But when you're a super smart guy back then, people get a little suspicious. It's said he could summon demons to do his bidding, and they would go all over the world to bring him delicacies. And that's just where his power started. There's myths of him defeating a coven of witches that he turned into stone. It's even said he changed the course of the river Steeds. But the most famous one is him summoning the devil to build a road to his castle. His father had just built a shiny new castle and it needed a road. I mean, you don't want to be the only castle in the neighborhood without a road. Like, what do people think? So he called the devil and many demons to build a road for him. He could have just hired contractors. He owed the devil his soul and foresaw that the devil would kill him by dropping a rock on his head. So he always wore a metal cap. But one day, he took off his metal cap when entering a church, and a rock fell on his head and killed him. They get you when you least expect. Number 4, John Dee. John Dee was born in 1527 on July 13th. He was an Elizabethan mathematician and astrologer, but he also liked to dabble in the occult. He was into some pretty freaky stuff. Even though he was researching black magic behind closed doors, he managed to work his way up as a man of intellect, becoming the royal astrologer for Queen Mary. However, his little secrets caught up with him, and he was arrested for heresy in 1555. How do you get caught for something back then? The only way you would find out would be if you told people. Like, how was your weekend? Pretty good, you know, sacrificed a goat to the Dark Lord. Anyways, when he got out, he kept digging into the occult. In 1582, he claimed to contact the spirit world. People weren't a fan of this, so he had to move up north to the Manchester Collegiate Church. You can go visit his office to this day. There's the desk that he worked at with a giant burn mark in it. It's said that it's the devil's footprint. I would be pissed. I work all this time to summon the devil. He shows up and he puts his feet on my furniture. Number 3, Robert Johnson. Become one of the greatest musicians who ever lived, and people are going to start rumors about you. Robert Johnson is one of the most talented and influential blues musicians who has ever walked the earth. And a big myth about him is that he sold his soul to the devil to become as great as he did. As the story goes, he was walking down a highway and came across a man that offered him the ability to play the blues like no one has ever done before, but would cost him his soul. Robert was like, yeah, I'll do that. I mean, what is a soul really? It's like a concept or like whatever. Well, Robert went down in history for his amazing skills and died suspiciously at 27. Number 2, Niccolo Paganini. Said to be the greatest violinist who ever lived. Seemed to be a common theme that back in the day, if you were great at something, they probably thought you sold your soul to the devil. No, it can be that you have like a natural gift and you work super hard, you just made a deal. Well, the same speculation goes for Niccolo. He was an Italian violinist like none other. He was so gifted that he would surpass anyone who ever taught him. He was touring at 15 and probably got hit on a lot. Part of why people probably thought that he had sold his soul to the devil was that he looked so ghoulish. He was tall, skinny, had pale skin, long black hair. He was kind of like a hot Edward Scissorhands. People would even say that they could see the devil hold his violin while he played. I think they were just jealous. Number 1, George Whitefield. Now this one is my favorite for sure. Yeah. George was a traveling evangelist. He wandered around trying to get people hyped on God. I mean, we've all seen these guys.
Do it, Jesus! A brand new hit! Bam, 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 bam!
In 1740, George was in Ipswich, Massachusetts. He was putting on a banger show. Like, people were going nuts. Apparently, the sermon was so hot and he was bashing the devil so hard that the devil showed up and was like, "You talking?" And George was like, "Yeah, I'm talking." And then he fought the devil. This is like an episode of Maury. George then summoned the holy power to push the devil out, and after that, the devil fell off a cliff and landed on one foot. He's got like a +10 on acrobatics. It's said that the devil's footprint is there to this day. The devil is probably at home like, "Dude, I don't even know you. Why are you talking so much smack?"
Starting us off with number 10 is The Hand. This was from Stephen Wagner, who said his dad told him the story. So back in 1942 in Juarez, Mexico, his dad was around 20 years old and he went to a circus that was visiting town. His younger brother came along and they didn't really go to see the acts, they were more interested in the freak shows. Disappointed after seeing the performers, they were about to leave with 2 girls when they ran into a short, stubby man. The stranger introduced himself as the greatest illusionist in the world. That's quite a hefty title. When asked if he was part of the circus, the man said the owner turned him down because his act was so frightening. The owner said he was Satan himself. Once he had their attention, he invited them back to his trailer in order to show them the act. Once inside, the stranger put a glove on his right hand, started running his left hand over his right while wiggling his fingers. He then started chanting bizarre words, and when he took the glove off, everyone's jaws just dropped. The stranger's hand was completely skeletal. He turned it, let them see the back, it was completely real. His brother went to take a closer look and the man grabbed his head and said he was really about to show them something now, and at this point everybody shat themselves and made a run for it. The stranger came out onto his porch laughing, and on the floor nearby was a bed of long nails pointing up which he jumped onto. Weird flex, but okay. Blood started coming out of his feet, but he was still just laughing it off. And from that day onwards, Stephen's father and brother knew they had met Satan. Coming in at number 9 is Father Urban Grandi. Now, Father Urban was a Roman Catholic priest that lived in the Loudun part of France. He was under major scrutiny and received a lot of criticism for ignoring his celibacy vow. If anything, he was known for having sexual relations with many women and as someone who had an elevated sense of lustful depravity. By 1632, he was accused of sending the demon Asmodai to enchant a group of Ursuline nuns into committing evil acts and becoming his sex slaves. You know, as priests do. After numerous nuns made accusations of seduction against him, he was arrested, then acquitted, and then re-arrested. During his second arrest, he was tortured by judges, after which they revealed a contract they found in his bedroom, which indicated he had signed a deal with Satan and many other demons. They saw it as evidence of him making a diabolical pact and convicted him of witchcraft and sentenced him to death. He was burnt at the stake. At number 8, we have A Better Life. This one's from Redditor Kodas_gaming, who said he had a really rough upbringing. His father abandoned his family, and his mother was a heroin addict.
Harbor Freight knows skill is important because on any given day, we're all mechanics, carpenters, fixers, DIYers, and training wheel taker-offers. We also know no one should overpay for dependable tools.
He used to see her getting beat to a pulp, after which she'd take her frustrations out on him. CPS ended up taking him and his brother away, but a few years later his mum was clean and back with their dad and they regained custody. Sort of happy ending, kind of, but not really. They lived in a small house in central Texas, and according to the user, the house had a terrifying aura. Anytime he was home, he felt like he was being watched, especially in the bathroom, and he would have regular nightmares. And at this point in his life, his mum was working herself to death because their dad was a lazy slob who did nothing. She got so depressed she tried to take her own life, and desperate to help, the user started praying to God every single day. But nothing changed. He realized for something to change, perhaps he could call on the demonic entity that engulfed his house rather than God. He researched satanic rituals for ages and finally found the one he needed. While his family were out for ice cream one day, he got on his knees, wax coming down the candles he'd lit, and cut his hand and started drawing symbols on the ground in his blood. Obviously while crying the whole time, because who wouldn't cry after doing that? He recited the words and made the deal. And right after he did that, a cold breeze swept through the house and everything went black. But he was pretty much unfazed because he expected something like that to happen, so he went to bed that night and had the worst nightmare ever. He saw himself in the reflection of the mirror in the bathroom with corpse grey skin, bloody tears, and his eyes were crimson as well. There was a noose around his neck and his hair was bloody. During the dream, he thought, this can't be me, and then the reflection started laughing, saying, it is now, you made the deal. He woke up in the bathtub covered in scratches and scars, and it just kept happening and getting worse. 1 month later, he started seeing things, hearing things, his nail beds began to recede and bleed, his canines became sharper, and his tongue used to get cut out of nowhere, and he started full on hallucinating and having visions of the past, of native people being slaughtered. And how did that even happen? I don't even know. And what did he get out of all of this? Other than his mum getting a high paying job, not much at all. So, moral of the story, know what you're getting into before you ask the devil for help. Filling our number 7 slot is Joseph Smith. Now, Joseph was a Mormon prophet in the early 1800s who claimed he encountered Satan before he saw Christ for the first time. We have both big shots in one story, how about that? The story goes that despite never doing this before, one day he just decided he was going to pray to God out loud. He went into the woods on a sunny day and knelt down and began to pray. I don't know why he went into the woods, he could have just done it in his house, but okay. But as soon as he did, he said he felt he was seized by a power that engulfed him entirely. He said it was so powerful he tried to speak but felt like his tongue was bound. A thick darkness surrounded him and he thought for sure he was going to die. And I mean, fair enough for being realistic. If I felt that, I'd probably think I was going to die too. He was ready to sink into this despair that was around him, but in one final hope, he used all his strength to call on God to get him out of Satan's hold. Then, all of a sudden, he saw a huge pillar of light over his head, which came came down on him. As the light rested on him, he saw two personages in the air above him, and everything was fine again. At least this one had a happy ending, sort of. Now at number 6 is Madame Lalaurie. Delphine Lalaurie has been mentioned many times on this channel, but just a quick recap for you. She was a big Creole socialite in New Orleans. To the public, that is. Inside her house, she tortured and killed the majority of her slaves in a way you can't even imagine. In 1834, a house fire took over her mansion, and that's when she got exposed because authorities found bodies upon bodies of bound or mutilated slaves. One stomach had been cut open and his intestines were wrapped around his neck. A bucket was also found with various organs from various slaves. A bucket. That's how much mass killing the woman was doing, that she needed a bucket for all the organs she was harvesting. Anyway, with some stroke of luck, she managed to escape New Orleans and go to France, but many believe she didn't just escape due to luck. She invented a religion involving voodoo and black magic, and on top of that, people vehemently believe she made a pact with the devil in order to be able to still be wealthy, still be free, and escape whilst committing these horrendous acts. I mean, for me, it was either the devil pact or she paid a lot of important money to let her go. What do you guys think? Coming in at number 5 is the Satanic Cult. This one's from Brad, who said back in 2005, him and his friends spent one summer TPing a lot of houses. In the town they grew up, there were always rumors of a satanic cult that operated around a 10-minute drive away. So one day they decided to go check it out and TP it. Ballsy move, I have to say. The 5 friends went there the day before moon, which I guess is a part of every scary story you hear nowadays, and they bypassed the fence and ended up in a garden enclosure and heard an eerie high-pitched sound. Ignoring it, they continued to explore, found an old locked church, and found nothing else and decided to leave. Bit anticlimactic, but just stay with me. When they got to their car, their key, which was working perfectly 10 minutes prior, just stopped working. The car alarm started going off and then it magically just unlocked by itself. They piled in and drove off, and mid-drive the lights in the car just went off. The driver didn't press anything to cause it, it just happened. Panicked, they rushed home, and when Brad got to his front porch, he found 3 identical black cats. Keep in mind he lives a good 25 miles away from the cult, so how do these cats even get to his house? He took the cats as a bad omen and decided to take the cats a few miles out of town and leave them there, and the whole drive he was being followed by 2 black cars despite taking small dirt roads. Now I don't know if people were just messing with him here or the satanic cult was there and they saw him and everything was their doing, but either way, it's scary and it's creepy. At number 4 is Giuseppe Tartini. Now from the name, doesn't he just sound like a brilliant Italian musician of some kind? His name just has the ring to it, you know? Anyway, Tartini was an Italian composer and violinist during the Baroque period. He was very influential in Italy, but he was also known for his huge inferiority complex and uncontrollable temper. And I can just see that equaling to a lot of smashed violins. But anyway, the story goes that one day Tartini heard Francesco Verrocchini playing the violin better than him, and he was fuming and also dissatisfied with his own skills. The event made him spiral into depression for months, and in that time he worked in solitude and practiced the violin for 12 hours a day. During this period, it's said he had a dream in which the devil appeared and he met him. He appeared at the foot of his bed and played a sonata on the violin like he invented the damn activity. He offered him success in all his musical dreams in exchange for his soul. Did he accept? Well, it was never really confirmed, but when he woke up the next day, he wrote down as much of the sonata as he could, but no matter how many times he played it, it just wasn't as good as the Devil's version. If you want to check it out, the sonata in question is called the Devil's Trill Sonata, his most well-known piece, and it's quite hard to play even by today's standards. But the fact he could never play it as well as the Devil, I mean, doesn't that just indicate he wasn't successful in everything he wanted to be? So, am I the only one identifying this major plot hole we have going on? Did he accept? Did he not? Let me know, Tartini. Filling our number 3 slot is Gemma Galgani. Gemma was an
Are you tired of your YouTube channel not getting the attention it deserves? Building a YouTube channel can be a very lucrative and successful way to make new fans or sell your product or service. But without the proper YouTube promotion, your channel might just get likes from your mom. Thanks, Mom. And buying views, using bots to grow views or subscriber counts is so 2020. That's why we created Sprint.
Italian mystic, later saint in Italy during the late 19th century. She believed that the devil was waging a personal war against her. She said he loved giving her horrible headaches to the point she couldn't even pray. I mean, honestly, I just feel like that was a bad migraine, but moving on. She went on to say that once she was writing at her desk alone and the devil came and dragged her from the table by her hair with such force that her hair came out in clumps. In another attack, the devil took the form of a big black dog and put his paws on her shoulders, making her whole body ache all over. And in another one, she was drinking holy water and he twisted her arms so backwards that she fell to the ground in pain. If that's not bad enough, she said he even took on the form of people she trusted or knew, and once he even took the form of an angel. The worst incident though was when he started giving her blows to the head. She ran to her room but found him there with a rope. He kept trying to get her to give in to the wickedness and she kept resisting, and so he kept striking her with the rope as she was on the ground. He then threw her on the bed, then dragged her from it and violently smashed her head against the ground, and she passed out. Just imagine all this happening in your room and no one's there to help you. I'd be terrified. But I'm also curious as to what form the devil took when he attacked her all those times, and if anybody was around, were they seeing this happen? Was she being attacked by an invisible force? Like, what was happening here? Now at number 2 is Steve. This one's from Redditor Shabby Boa, whose real name is Steve and who used to be a trucker for 30 years. One night after a drop-off, he was on his way back home when he stopped at a diner to pee. It was completely empty, no customers, no staff, absolutely no one. He quickly peed, and when he came out, a grey-haired man was sitting at the bar. He told Steve he owned the diner and gave him food and a drink. When he got up to leave, the man said food is not what you truly desired tonight. Waited out, Steve left and got into his truck. About an hour and a half later, he had to pee again. Steve, you've got a small bladder, mate, and saw another small diner which he stopped at. He went inside and again it was completely empty, save a grey-haired man at the bar. It was the same man who said nice to have you back, Steve, as soon as he walked in. Steve got pissed at this point, thinking he was being screwed over by this guy, and demanded to know what the guy wanted. He said he was trying to help Steve. He started asking about Steve and how he used to have a family. Steve told him his wife and daughter died in a house fire years ago caused by faulty wiring. But the man questioned him, saying it wasn't just faulty wiring. The faulty wiring was a happy coincidence that just so happened to have happened the same time Steve left a lit cigarette in the house. Steve fought with him more, and in the end the man offered him a deal. He said he could bring back his wife and daughter in exchange for his soul after he died. Thinking it was complete bullshit, he agreed and left the diner. Before he did, he asked the man who he was, to which he responded, I am the devil. That night he got home as if he never stopped anywhere at all, and when he entered the house, he heard his wife say, Steve, is that you? And the small footsteps of his daughter. He was so excited, but when they came down the stairs, their skin was charred black. Chunks of it were falling off, their clothes had fused and melted with their skin, and Steve could barely hold in his puke. And at that point he'd realized he'd made the biggest mistake ever, and that the next 30 years were literally gonna be hell. And finally, at number 1 is The Man. This one's from VR Greg, who said she met the devil for the first time when she was 8 years old. She was walking through a forest on her way home from school when she encountered a black-haired man in a shabby suit. Except one foot of his was a goat hoof and the other was a rooster claw. She could see them when she looked at him directly, but peripherally they looked completely normal. She took him for a walk and then he left. By the time she was a teenager, she assumed the counter was maybe a dream, or maybe that she just imagined the whole thing. But one day she was watching a news story about a man who got away with killing his wife, and as they showed the judge announcing the not guilty verdict, the murderer turned around and smiled at a man behind him who wasn't his lawyer. She recognized him right away. Black hair, shabby suit, hadn't aged a day. Her parents threw her a surprise 16th birthday to which nobody came to, which is just really sad. I'm sorry that happened to you. She ran home crying, and she knew no one came because her classmate Erin had her party the same day just to spite her. That night she slept thinking about all the horrible ways Erin deserved to be punished, and the next day at the breakfast table her dad looked shaken. He told her that Erin had been found dead in the park. She met the devil the same day in her room, and he told told her she had wanted it to happen and he executed it for her. He offered her a deal, but thankfully the one piece of common sense that 90% of people possess is knowing that you should never make a deal with the devil, so she didn't. The girl didn't see him again until the funeral of her mother, where he told her the doctors lied to her about her mother dying peacefully, that it was agony and that no one was around to help her. She started immediately screaming and her dad ran over to her and made her sit down. When she asked him where the black-haired man was, he said, "You were standing alone, honey," and just started screaming out of nowhere. Shivers. That gave me shivers.
Number 10, Princess Diana's last words. Okay, since Harry and Meghan were trending recently, I figured we'd open with this one. First responder who actually rescued Princess Diana that fateful day during that fateful crash. The same first responder opened up last year to speak about said incident and even Diana's final words before her untimely death later on August 31st, 1997. Now that day, Diana and her boyfriend Dodi Fayed were being followed by a group of paparazzi in Paris. Just an insane reason to kick off all of this nonsense. But during this chaos, the driver of her car lost control in the tunnel. There's still a lot of, what happened there going on with the driver. I'll save that for later. Sergeant Xavier Gorbalan was on duty that day and he did not know that Princess Diana was the one involved in that accident. Now he said after Fayed was removed, I was left with the passenger. Now she spoke in English and she asked, "My God, what happened?" She didn't say anything else until she later passed at the hospital. Number 9, Tupac's last words. Chris Carroll, who has since retired from the Las Vegas Metro Police Department back in 2010, at the time he was a bike patrol officer working a night shift on the evening of September 7th, 1996. He was working outside of the MGM Grand Hotel. Now I can't say certain things or details on YouTube because, rules and violations and yada yada yada. But after Tupac was attacked, sure, Chris Carroll was the first responder on the scene. In his words, here's what happened, according to an article on Billboard. Quote, "So I'm looking at Tupac, and he's trying to yell back at Suge. Suge Knight was also involved, of course. And I'm asking him, who attacked you? What happened? Who did it? Anything, right? And he was just kind of ignoring me. He was making eye contact with me here and there, but overall, he's trying to yell at Suge. And I kept asking him over and over, who did this? Who attacked you? And he basically kept ignoring me. And then I saw in his face and in his movements, all of a sudden, in the snap of a finger, he changed. And he went from struggling to speak, being non-cooperative, to an I'm at peace type of behavior. So just like that, he went from fighting to I can't do it. And then when he made that transition, then he looked at me. And he's looking at me right in my eyes. And that's when I looked at him and I said, one more time, who did this? Who attacked you? And he looked at me, he took a breath to get the words out, and then he opened his mouth, and I thought I was actually going to get some cooperation. And then the words came out, F you. I can't say it, obviously, but yeah, he said F you. He didn't say anything. And at that point, an ambulance showed up and he went into unconsciousness, end quote. How amazing is that? I mean, obviously it's not amazing that Tupac died, but the fact that he went out like that and didn't say anything. Number 8, Dark Revenge. This one was posted by a user named My Dog Operates Better Than You. Great name, really great name. Interesting nurse story, here we go. I did a rotation in a burn unit. There are tons of stories that go around, but I'll share my favorite. A man attacked one of his night workers one night, but as soon as this flame was lit, the victim, she immediately bear hugged him, causing them both to suffer pretty severe injuries, pretty severe burns, and unfortunately, hers included an inhalation burn, so her fate was unfortunately sealed. Later on, they were both being treated in the same ICU on opposite ends, but sadly, weeks later, she ended up coding and passed away. And for about 30 minutes, as things started to quiet down, that guy, that not so great guy that did all this, he starts randomly screaming from his room, "Get her out, get her out." Okay, this one's got layers because it's not her last words per se, but many people have heard this story and have agreed that she was saying some nasty stuff to him before moving on, right? Or else who's he talking about? Either way, I'm sure that's going to be haunting him at night regardless. Thank you for sharing. My dog operates better than you. And also, again, great name. Number 7, the man in black. Oh, this is scary. This story gave me the creeps when I read it online. Here we go. A nice old lady who told my CNA that she wanted to wear all white. Now, when I asked why, she said that the man in black is here. Now, she looked in the corner of the room. The CNA also looked, but there was no one there. That's when I came into the room. We asked her to describe what she was seeing, and she said, he's in all black and he's got a top hat on. That's terrifying. The hat man, she said, and then she whispered, and his eyes are red, while her eyes moved across the room directly to behind that CNA, almost as if she was watching him move closer to us while describing him, which is terrifying. Now, sadly, she died later that night, but it was unexpected. That room creeped me out for a long time after that. It almost reminds me of that story that Aaron Rodgers was telling recently about this weird hat man, like this all black hat man in the shadows that he's seeing after he did some ayahuasca trip. What's everyone
Without
saying?
no
What's that,
items.
man?
All I
I'm
had to do was
terrified.
heal
Number
myself.
6. Hey, this one's from a nurse with username Hella Clogged. Great name. I love these names. When I was a nursing student up on an ICU floor, I was hanging antibiotics in my patient's room when I heard an audible, hey. Now, I turn around, as anyone would, and there is no one else in the room. Okay, mind you, my patient was sedated, so there's no possible way that it was them. Also, it was a woman's voice as well, so I thought that it was my preceptor. Now, I went back out to the nurse's station and I asked my coworker if that was her in the room trying to catch my attention, and she told me no, and I've never seen someone's eyes get so large. Apparently, the room that I was in had the most paranormal sightings and activity out of all the rooms in the unit. Awesome. That's lovely to hear. Imagine that. Cool. How do I sign out? Sightings as in shadows in the corner of the room, voices being heard, and curtains being flung violently across railings. Horrible stuff. No one ever told me about this room prior to my preceptorship, so it added to everyone's beliefs that it was actually haunted. That comes from Hella Clogged. Again, great name. Even greater story. That's terrifying. Thank you for sharing. The fact that they followed an invisible force with their eyes, that detail there gave me the most creeps. Whew, thanks for sharing. That's really good. Number 5, a grim plea. This was from a user named Kalasari, and it's about a DNR patient who was on comfort care. They were on a high dose of at the time, and they were hallucinating. This is normal. But she would alternate between grasping for things not there and trying to climb out of bed. Pretty alarming. She was too unsteady to walk, so my job was to sit in the room and make sure that she was safe. She tried to get up, and I went to ask her what she needed, and she grabbed my arm and pulled me down towards her face and said, very angrily mind you, kill me. That one messed with me for a while. Yeah, not all these stories have a silver lining. Some of them are just dark and horrible. Welcome to Most Amazing. There you go. This is what you wanted, right? You click the title, there you are. That depressing feeling in your chest, you got it. Click that thumbs up. Let's keep this grim train rolling. Number 4, paramedic promise. Okay, that last one was dark, but I promise this one will get your hopes back up for humanity. Uploaded by user Henry RN. Back when I was a paramedic in Oakland, I was taking care of an elderly gentleman in the back of my ambulance. He was looking up into the upper corner of the ambulance and he said, "It's okay, Lulu, I'll be with you soon." Kind of comforting. His daughter was with him and told me later that Lulu was his wife who had died 20 years prior. Now, a few minutes later, he sadly went into cardiac arrest and passed away. Okay, great. That's gives me a little bit of hope for the afterlife, afterworld. Also, I'm terrified at the same time. Isn't that lovely? Thank you for sharing, Henry RN. Henry, right now. That is your real name. Number 3, first code. This one comes from Falling Star 24. That's a nice name, it's pretty normal. My first code as a nurse was of a middle-aged mother who we think ended up having a brain bleed. She was ripping her gown off at the time and ripping sheets off the bed, and eventually she yanked off her heart monitor. I was trying to start a blood transfusion at the time, but I needed to get her vitals beforehand, which of course was impossible because she wouldn't stay long enough for any of it to read. I'd given her a sedative and I was praying that it would kick in soon, but she kept grabbing my arm saying, "Come here, look at me, help me," with fear in her eyes, and I will obviously never forget. I'm pretty sure I snapped back, "I'm trying," which of course I wish was something comforting now instead. Because then she leaned back, her eyes got droopy, she closed her mouth and then snapped her eyes wide open but totally glossed over. And that was it. Again, that is from Falling Star 24. I can't imagine having that unfold in front of you in real life in real time. I wouldn't sleep again. All these stories, like, kudos. If you do this job, I need these jobs, can't do it. That's crazy. I'm like saying lists online, I'm talking about these people. I'm like, yeah, I'm doing nothing. This is nothing. Number 2, I knew it. This comes from username Penguin. Great name. I wanted that one, but you beat me to it. They say, I'm an ICU nurse. A patient's son rang the hospital at 11 p.m. on a Saturday night saying that he was sure his dad was dying. His dad had had a severe stroke and was doing okay. Recovery would be difficult, but he wasn't expected to die and was pretty stable at the time. I was looking after him and it was a lot of work because he would try and get up, but then he couldn't walk, so he'd fallen a lot. The son really wanted to come in, even though it was way past visiting hours. But you know, I'll bend the rules in a good cause. I figured, what the heck? It's a Saturday night. Come on in and sit with your dad. Of course. I'm like, you're a great person for that also, side note. Sadly, the patient died about 2 minutes before the son walked in the door. It was like a switch was just turned off and he just died like that. The last thing he said to me was, am I bothering anyone? And I told him at that point, of course not, even though he had some very frustrating behavior because of the stroke. Now the son, of course, at that point just started crying and was screaming, but he started saying, I knew it, I knew it, I knew it, over and over again. How the heck he knew? Well, we were all a little bit freaked out. Now I'm freaked out just after saying that story, so thanks. That makes all of us now. Thanks for sharing. And finally, number 1, not your ring. We'll finish on a scary one that's oddly nice. I don't know, here we go. This one comes from Wacky Detective. There's the wackiest detective out there. They say, when I worked at the funeral home, I was told a story about an elderly lady that had died. The husband said he wanted her to be buried with her ring as she never took it off. My coworker was in the morgue and was washing the body. She removed said ring to mark it down in the paperwork, but as soon as she did, a styrofoam head that they used for wigs went flying across the room. At that point, she just said out loud, all right, I'll put your ring back on. And then she did so. And after that, there were no more disturbances. I mean, it's kind of funny, I don't know. I mean, I would probably faint if that happened to me, but, you know, I love how casual your friend was in that scenario. That's what makes it great and gives me hope. Thanks for sharing.
Starting us off at number 10 is Cursed Like a Sailor. One nurse who works in the ICU took to Reddit under the name CABC, posting the weirdest thing a patient ever said to them. They start off by saying, quote, I had a gentleman who was DNR on comfort care. He was demented and was cursing like a sailor. He seemed to have moments of clarity and when asked to see his brothers, who were both dead. Now, that all by itself, not creepy whatsoever. I mean, nurses are definitely used to an array of colorful language, considering how much of their days are spent with people in immense pain. But after a particularly worrisome heart rhythm, his rate started speeding up exponentially, and she began to think that this might be the end. At that moment, Reddit user says, quote, the patient looked at me in the eyes and said, what's your name? To which I replied, my name. He asked, what do you do here? I'm a nurse, I replied. The dying man was quiet for some time, then out of nowhere, he just said, F you, and died in silence 20 minutes later. I mean, what was the reason? Coming in at number 9 is Paint the House. Maybe it's just me, but I think the biggest question people have about dying is, will they get to see those who have already died wherever it is they are going? It's the whole what really happens to us when we die that likely plagues most of us. So maybe this isn't the darkest on the list, but it's still a bit odd nonetheless. In a post made by a now deleted Reddit account, the nurse explained one of the strangest and simultaneously comforting things they've ever heard. The post said they overheard a conversation between a patient and their grandchild. The grandfather was fading fast, but he turned to his granddaughter and said, quote, Dar, I can't hang around. Your grandma needs me to paint the house. The granddaughter was just about to remind him that her grandma had been dead for several years and there was no house to paint. Then he died right there and then in front of her. The Reddit user claims that while a bit strange, she likes to think that he really was living in his afterlife with his wife painting their house. Next up at number 8, he knew. This one comes from Reddit user Paper Rainbow, and they start off by saying that they came into work for an early shift and were handed over to a patient who had been experiencing high levels of anxiety, including a panic attack the previous evening. Reddit friend continues on saying that all morning the patient had still been quite anxious, but was showing nothing that was concerning and that tests were still coming back fine. So they were merely there to sit with him and make sure he felt okay. But then things started getting weird. The patient starts getting worse, breathing, lying in fetal, and looking like they're on the brink of another panic attack. So the Reddit user tries to reassure them, saying doctors will be here in 10 minutes and to please lie on his bed.
My name is Alfonso, and I got Botox Cosmetic for the first time. The lines that I was concerned the most about were on my forehead. I'm really happy with my results.
Talk to your doctor about Botox Cosmetic and whether it's right for you. The effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection.
So that he can better monitor his breathing. He refuses, saying, quote, I won't make it until they get here and I won't face the other way. Still, the patient continued to be really agitated, so this time the nurse suggested to move for comfort. That's when he said, quote, I won't make it until the doctors get here. If I turn to face the other way, I'll be gone. The patient repeated this phrase over and over and over. Then sure enough, as soon as the doctors walked in, he turned to the other side and died. I mean, that can't have just been a coincidence. Coming in at number 7, I understand. In a now deleted Reddit account, one nurse posted saying that although they had heard many strange or concerning last words from a patient, that this one was the creepiest. They started off by explaining that the man was obviously on his deathbed and that they knew he didn't have much time left as he was experiencing renal failure. Apparently the patient has been pretty quiet for some time, but then all of a sudden his eyes got wide and he loudly yelled, I see a bright light, horses, no eyes, no, no, no. He then fell asleep for a bit, and Reddit user goes on to say that he woke up, looked up, and with his last breath he said, quote, I understand. And he died right at that moment. The user finished off by explaining that, quote, we know in the medical field that these situations are provoked by a cascade of neurotransmitters in disarray due to tissue and organ failure. But I sometimes have my doubts, and perhaps we are seeing more than we are led to believe. Coming in at number 6 is the Grim Reaper. Hallucinations can apparently be a normal occurrence for patients nearing death due to the high amount of pain meds they're on. But that doesn't mean that what they say still can't haunt you to your core, mostly because you never really know what the truth is. One Reddit user named Koyena posted about a patient they had had one night that said, quote, the devil has been in my room all night, but don't worry, God is with you. Then that night, after a horrible and brutal seizure, the man died with his eyes wide open and a creepy grimace plastered across his face. They explained that prior to the seizure, the man had been screaming at the devil in their room and kept shouting over and over, get out of here, the building's gonna blow. Now, thank God, nothing actually ever happened to the building, but still, the last thing this person ever said was that they were being haunted by the devil, and then they died with a haunting expression on their face. So definitely unsettling. Coming in at number 5, DNR. Reddit user Kali Asari posted a few years back about one DNR patient they had had that really affected them for a long time after they died. So first off, DNR, if you don't know, stands for Do Not Resuscitate, which means that the patient has opted out of any and all life-saving treatments. Reddit friend starts off by saying, quote, the patient was on a high dose of morphine and hallucinating. She would alternate between grasping for things not there and trying to climb out of bed. She was too unsteady to walk, so my job was to sit in the room and make sure she was safe. The patient apparently continued trying to get up, so the nurse simply asked, what do you need? I'd be happy to get it for you. To which the woman grabbed her arm, pulled her in close, and said very angrily, quote, kill me. Safe to say the nurse was expecting her to ask for some water or something. Obviously the nurse did not kill her, but she did die soon after, and that was the last thing she said before she died. Pretty creepy, if you ask me. Coming in at number 4, a confession. Okay, so this one isn't from a nurse, it's actually from a surgeon, but it's really creepy, so I'm still counting it. There is a lot you might expect someone to confess on their deathbed. Cheating scandals, admitting that they hated something or someone, that they were a drug addict, or maybe there was a secret undercover agent. But this story posted to Reddit by the user Really Unbelievable a few years ago honestly sounds like the start of every plot of a true crime doc I've ever heard of. They say, quote, not sure if this is creepy, but a man on his deathbed kept repeating, The body is in the woods next to the oak tree, over and over and over again until he passed. Yes, that is creepy, I would say. Was this man confessing to killing someone and hiding the evidence? Apparently police got involved and they ended up searching the area the patient had mentioned but never recovered any evidence of a body. True, it could have been nothing, but that doesn't really seem like something you'd say without any grounds to back it up. Coming in at number 3, hemorrhaging. This next story was by a now deleted Reddit account and might be one of the goriest stories I've ever heard. The patient was hooked up to a trach, which is a tube connected to your neck that helps you breathe when the patient is not able to do so themselves. A Reddit user says, quote, I walked up to her and saw bright red blood just started shooting up the vent circuit and immediately obstructed it. This wasn't the first time they'd seen something like this, so they turned to the surgeon and explained that the patient was hemorrhaging, to which the doc apparently replied that it was just a little bit of blood, assuming the nurse was referring to the access site in her groin. The nurse knew that there was no time to waste, so they popped off the vent, but it was worse than they had even imagined. Blood started pouring out of her trach, mouth and nose at an exceeding rate until a pool about 6 feet in diameter circled them on the floor and they were covered from chest down. They said after a few minutes, the patient used her last bit of strength to look into Reddit users' eyes and just say, quote, let me die. Coming in at number 2, fire. As I've mentioned, many nurses or medical staff chalk up strange late-stage behavior to pain meds or a way to cope. But this one story by L_3 had her questioning her own sanity for a few days after. Quote, I had an old lady flag me down in the hallway a few days before she passed, and with her emaciated face and bulging eyes, she said, you know where I'm going. The nurse asked her what she meant by that, to which she replied, you know where I'm going when I die, and it ain't up. I mean, while it was definitely obscure, our Reddit friend wasn't too freaked out by this point. She simply asked the patient if she would like to see the hospital priest on staff, to which the patient shook her head no and said, it's too late for that. Then, a few days later, the patient was in bed, eating her dinner, and started screaming. And so the nurse ran in to find her shouting, fire, fire, fire. There's fire everywhere. The patient died a few hours later, and the nurse couldn't sleep that night as she was so freaked out that she'd actually witnessed someone seeing the literal fires of hell. And last up in our number 1 spot today is Saw the Devil. Posted by Reddit user LolaCSD 6 years ago, they start off by explaining that their patient was a 20-year-old who had previously been a gang member, then ended up diagnosed with terminal liver cancer. The patient was very angry at the universe, which the nurse felt sympathy for, considering how young he was when he was dying, but mentioned that he was an incredibly aggressive and angry young man, often spitting in her or his family's faces and calling just about everyone who spoke to him cruel names. His anger only got worse as his condition progressed, but still his family remained by his side. On his last day, the family called in the nurse to the room as he wasn't responding. His eyes were glossed over, his skin cold, and was barely breathing. His mother, in a last attempt to comfort him, whispered to go towards the light, to Jesus, to which the young man came to and shouted, F your Jesus. Then the nurse said the next part haunted her for weeks. He then slowly turned his head to the left and got the horrific look on his face as if he was looking at something we couldn't see. And horrified, like in a bad movie, his face contorted and he screamed with his last breath, eyes wide, oh shit, oh shit, oh no! Then made a guttural noise and promptly fell back into the bed and died. I mean, if that doesn't sound like someone seeing hell, then I don't know what does.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Alexander Prokorenko. In 2016, Alexander was a senior lieutenant with the Special Armed Forces of the Russian Armed Forces. He was 25 years old at the time and was fighting in the Syrian civil war. On March 17th of 2016, during the Palmyra offensive, he found himself surrounded by ISIS militants. Not wanting to be captured alive, and also bravely doing what he thought was best, he ordered an airstrike on his location. His command was slightly confused in the beginning of this order and asked him to confirm his order, and that is when Alexander spoke his final words to command. He said, quote, "They are outside. This is the end, Commander. Thank you. Tell my family and my country I love them. Tell them I was brave and I fought until I could no longer. Please take care of my family. Avenge my death. Goodbye, Commander. Tell my family I love them. Alexander left behind his wife Katya and the child that they were expecting at the time of his death. He was nicknamed the Russian Rambo after his death and was awarded the title Hero of the Russian Federation for his ultimate sacrifice. In our number 9 spot today, we have Michael Ney. Michael was the first Duke of Elchingen and was the first Prince of Moskva and was a French military commander in the French Revolutionary Wars as well as the Napoleonic Wars. He was even one of the original 18 marshals of the empire that Napoleon I created. After Napoleon was dethroned and exiled in 1815, however, Michael was arrested and tried by the Chamber of Peers for treason. When the verdict was given, 137 peers voted for the death penalty, 17 voted for deportation, 5 abstained, and there was 1 single vote for acquittal. Unfortunately, this was a majority rule situation, and Michael was sentenced to death by the firing squad. On December 7th, 1815, Michael was put in front of the firing squad, and he refused to wear a blindfold. He was surprisingly given the right to order the fire himself, and before doing so, these are the final words that he spoke. Quote, "Soldiers, when I give the command to fire, fire straight at my heart. Wait for the order, it will be my last to you. I protest against my condemnation. I have fought 100 battles for France and not one against her. Soldiers, fire." I couldn't imagine having to be the one to order your own death, especially when you don't want to die, so this one definitely leaves quite an eerie feeling. In our number 8 spot today, we have Gregorio del Pilar. Gregorio was a general of the Philippine Revolutionary Army during the Philippine-American War and is known for being one of the youngest generals in the Revolutionary Army at just the young age of 22 years old. He was nicknamed Boy General and was also known for being quite a ladies' man. In 1896, Gregorio finished his Bachelor of Arts and was going on to complete more education, but when the revolution broke out, he enlisted himself for military service. In 1899, the Americans were advancing on the Tiré Pass, and this is the battle that unfortunately was Gregorio's last. He was sadly shot in the neck and died almost instantly. While his last spoken words weren't recorded, it was his final diary entry that I want to talk about today. His final entry read, quote, "The general has given me the pick of all the men that can be spared and ordered me to defend the pass. I realize what a terrible task has been given to me, and yet I felt that this is the most glorious moment of my life. What I do is done for my beloved country. No sacrifice can be too great." It obviously shows how incredibly dedicated he was to his country, and perhaps he had some sort of inkling that this battle just may be his last. At the end of the day, his legacy certainly lives on. In our number 7 spot today, we have Murray Hudson. Murray Hudson was born in 1938 and was a sergeant with the Royal New Zealand Infantry Regiment. On February 13th, 1974, Murray was a drill instructor and was supervising a training exercise when things took a really dark turn. One of the officers in training, or a non-commissioned officer who was participating in this training exercise, accidentally armed a grenade that he was about to throw. This is obviously an incredibly frightening situation, and one that made the officer completely freeze. After all, what do you really do in that situation? Murray saw him freeze and realized what had happened and ordered him to throw it, which I guess is the smartest move and the only thing that you can do. The officer unfortunately was still frozen and wasn't reacting, so in an attempt to save him, Murray went over and took his hand and tried to release the grenade so that he could throw it. During this process, the grenade unfortunately exploded, which took both of their lives. The final words of Murray were his directions and him saying, "Throw it, just throw it." Such a tragic event that absolutely could have been avoided. Murray was awarded the George Cross after his passing, which is the highest award bestowed by the British government for gallantry, not in the presence of an enemy. In our number 6 spot today, we have Sanada Yukimura. During the Warring States period in Japan, there was one incredibly famous samurai warrior. Sanada Yukimura, whose real name was Sanada Nobushige, was an incredible fighter and is best known for being the leading general on the defending side of the siege of Osaka. Sanada is known as a hero and has even been called the #1 hero in Japan. Unfortunately, the summer siege of Osaka Castle was his last, where his haunting last words come from. He ended up being mortally struck, and this is when he stumbled out onto the field while removing his helmet. This is when he said the words, quote, "I am Sanada Nobushige, no doubt an adversary quite worthy of you, but I am exhausted and can fight no longer. Go on. Take my head as your trophy." These truly might be some of the coolest last words ever, and that is sincerely a reflection of the type of warrior he was. In our number 5 spot today, we have Sir Philip Sidney. Sir Philip Sidney was born in November of 1554 and was an English poet and soldier and is one of the most prominent figures of the Elizabethan era. In 1586, he joined Sir John Norris in the Battle of Zutphen in the fight against the Spanish, but it was during this battle that he was shot in the thigh, which would ultimately lead to his death. One of the most well-known stories about Sir Philip Sidney is when he was lying wounded next to another soldier who was also wounded. He spoke his last words to the other soldier when he was giving him his water. He said, "Take it. Thy need is greater than mine." It seems as though he must have known that he was about to pass, but it also shows the kind of person he was, which seems to be a very noble person. He certainly left a legacy, considering we are still here talking about him today. In our number 4 spot today, we have John Sedgwick. John was born in 1813 and was a military officer and Union Army general during the American Civil War. On May 9th, 1864, he and his men were at Spotsylvania Courthouse, and he was directing different placements when Confederate sharpshooters who were around 1,000 yards away began shooting at them. This, of course, caused for some of John's men to duck for cover like any regular human being would when being shot at. I'm not exactly sure why, but John seemed to have been less concerned with the shots and more concerned with the soldiers taking cover, and he continued to strut around and said, quote, "I am ashamed of you. They couldn't hit an elephant at this distance." It was unfortunately just a few moments later that he was fatally struck by a bullet just under his left eye. His chief of staff, Martin T. McMahon, was close to him and heard his last words and tried to catch him as he fell. Medical personnel were of course called as quickly as possible, but unfortunately he never regained consciousness. In our number 3 spot today, we have Henri de la Tour d'Auvergne. Henri was a French general who has gone down in history as one of the greatest military commanders in modern history. During the Dutch War in the summer campaign in Salzburg on July 27th, 1675, Henri was struck by one of the first shots. I believe it was also a cannonball, so it was just really not a good scene. He laid on the ground, barely able to breathe, when he uttered his last words, which were, quote, "I did not mean to be killed today." Aside from that being very honest, it's also quite sad. I always like to picture people's final moments as peaceful or just hope that they have no idea what's happening, but this was of course not the case for him. After his passing, when his death was announced, people all over were mourning the loss as he was an incredibly well-respected man. In our number 2 spot today, we have Jan Žižka. Jan is a hero in Czech and was lovingly nicknamed One-Eyed Žižka after he lost one and then both eyes during battle. He is still regarded as one of the most prominent military leaders despite living so long ago, which certainly is quite a legacy. There was quite a bit of time during his life where he and his men were fighting against King Sigismund, who is the king of Bohemia. Jan didn't end up passing away in battle, however. He actually died of the plague in 1492. After his passing, his men called themselves orphans because they felt like they had lost their father, and if that doesn't speak to the kind of leader he was, his next pick definitely will. It has been recorded that his last words were, quote, "Make my skin into drumheads for the Bohemian cause." While kind of gross in thought, I think it definitely shows his commitment and passion and how he wanted to lead his men into battle any way he could, even after his passing. In our number 1 spot today, we have Maynard L. Beamy Beamsdorfer. Maynard was a World War II hero who luckily went on to live a very long life after his duty was over. He ended up passing away at the age of 92, and really, who could be upset at making it that far in life, especially when you survived such a high-risk job? He passed away in 2016 and was thankfully surrounded by his family, which truly makes his death one of the most pleasant on this list, which I am very glad about. His final words spoken to his family were, quote, "Did I do good?" I think that is both very sweet and quite sad at the same time. It's wonderful that he was able to be around family, and I am certain they assured him that he did, in fact, do very good. I hope in his final moments he really did feel proud of himself, and I hope when he slipped away, he knew the answer to his question. In our number 10 spot, we have...
I'm treating this like a murder case. But some questions just don't have answers.
Spencer Perceval. Spencer was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland before his assassination in 1812. At 5:15 p.m. on May 11th of that year, Spencer was on his way to an inquiry and was passing through the House of Commons when a man drew a pistol and shot Spencer in the chest. As Spencer fell to the floor, he uttered his last words, which were "murder" and "oh my god." It's super scary that in his final moments he was realizing what had happened to him, which was obviously terrible. By the time a surgeon arrived just a few minutes later after the shooting, Spencer's pulse was already gone and he was pronounced dead. In our number 9 spot today, we have Getulio Vargas. Before I dive into this one, guys, please don't forget to hit that thumbs up button because it really helps us out. Vargas was the president of Brazil for a few different periods of time. From 1930 to 1934, he was interim president. In 1934, he was constitutional president until 1937, and from then until 1945, he was actually a dictator. Vargas actually ended up taking his own life in the end on August 24th, 1954. Since no one was around when he did it, his last spoken words aren't recorded, but he did leave a note behind for his son, who was the one who found him. Part of the note read as, "Nothing remains except my blood. Now I gave you my life, now I give you my death." This is honestly very eerie, and I think it really reflects the kind of mental state he was in at the time of his death. In our number 8 spot today, we have King George IV. King George IV was the King of the United Kingdom and Great Britain and Ireland from 1820 to 1830. King George hasn't necessarily been praised for being a good king or person, really, but that is not what we are here to talk about today. King George was a heavy drinker and lived an extremely indulgent lifestyle that led to some pretty extreme health conditions. Because of his poor health, in the years before his death, he was almost entirely bedridden and suffered from bouts of breathlessness. He went almost entirely blind from cataracts and had such bad gout that he couldn't even sign documents because his arm and hand were so sore. King George passed away on the morning of June 26, 1830, and while his last words have been disputed, they were somewhere along the lines of, "Oh God, I am dying, this is death." I know
I told
he wasn't
myself I
a
was
great
going to
dude,
stop
but it is
this in
still
like
pretty
4
sad to
different
think
times.
of someone dying in such pain. After
It's
his
easy
death, it
enough,
was
isn't it?
discovered that he had died due to upper gastrointestinal bleeding that was caused due to a ruptured blood vessel in his stomach. But he also had a large tumor in his bladder, and his heart was enlarged with calcified valves. So all in all, he was an extremely unwell guy. In our number 7 spot, we have Albert I of Belgium. Albert I was the King of Belgium from 1909 to 1934 during quite an interesting time for the country. He really focused on his subjects and was honestly a pretty well-respected king. He passed away in 1934 after a mountaineering accident. On February 17th of that year, while climbing the side of a difficult cliff, he ended up unfortunately falling to his death. He was 58 years old at the time, and speculations began to swirl about what exactly happened since he was alone at the time of his passing. Since he was alone, his exact last words are likely unknown, but these are some of the last words he spoke to the last person he saw before the accident. "If I feel in good form, I shall take the difficult way up. If I do not, I shall take the easy one. I shall join you in an hour." While this sentence is fairly normal, it's pretty dark knowing what we know now. He really had no idea how close he was to his death. In our number 6 spot today, we have James Monroe. James was the 5th President of the United States from March of 1817 to March of 1825. While James isn't regarded as a necessarily bad president, he did have slaves and owned a pretty large plantation, so I'm gonna go ahead and just deem him as not that great of a guy. He ended up passing away at the age of 73 on July 4th, 1831, of heart failure and tuberculosis. His last words were, "I regret that I should leave this world without beholding him again." The him he was talking about was his best friend's James Madison. This is kind of cute, but also very sad. The pair had actually had a falling out after many years of friendship, which really just adds a little insult to injury on that one. In our number 5 spot today, we have Francisco Solano Lopez. Francisco Solano Lopez was the 2nd president of Paraguay from 1862 until he passed away on March 1st, 1870. He was a really controversial president as people blamed him for the outbreak of the Paraguayan War. He actually ended up dying in another war. He was offered his life if he surrendered, but he refused and still tried to fight back. His final words were, "I die for my homeland." He really ended up making the greatest sacrifice he could. It's just really sad that things had to end that way. In our number 4 spot today, we have Lal Bahadur Shastri. Lal was the 2nd Prime Minister of India from June of 1964 until January of 1966. He was a leader who really tried his best not to mix religion with politics, and honestly lived his life trying to be a servant to the public as best as possible. He ended up passing away just one day after signing the treaty to end the Indo-Pakistan War. While it was released that he died from cardiac arrest, people have since speculated that it was a cover-up and that foul play was actually involved. His final words were, "O Father, O Rama." Rama is a deity in Hinduism and is the 7th avatar of the god Vishnu. Assuming that he really did die from cardiac arrest, I just really hope he wasn't calling out for the name of his gods because he was in pain. In our number 3 spot, we have George V. George V was the king of the United Kingdom from 1910 to 1936 when he passed away. He wasn't originally supposed to be king, but in 1892 his older brother ended up passing away unexpectedly, which put him in line for the throne just after his father. He ended up taking over the role once his father had passed. For the last few years of his life, he ended up falling quite ill, and after his favorite sister passed away, he fell into a deep depression, which definitely didn't help his health at all. His last words were, "God damn you," which he said to his nurse as she injected him with a sedative. This is dark because his doctor actually admitted to giving him drugs that would speed up his dying process. He was certainly already on his deathbed, but it's pretty freaky that he was basically forced into dying sooner. And I feel like he knew what was going on considering his rude language to his nurse. I don't know about you guys, but this one feels pretty suspicious.
Flintstones vitamins are the #1 pediatrician recommended children's vitamin brand.
In our number 2 spot today, we have Harold Holt. Harold was the 17th Prime Minister of Australia until his death in 1967. In December of that year, Harold was with 4 other people when he convinced everyone to stop at Cheviot Beach for a swim. The weather conditions were pretty rough, so only one other person actually went into the water with him. Harold ended up going too far out and got caught in the rip, which pulled him completely out of sight. This was actually the last time anybody has ever seen him because his body has never been found. His last words were, "I know this beach like the back of my hand." It's super sad to know that he really had no idea the danger that he was just about to put himself in. In our number 1 spot today, we have Samuel Doe. Samuel was the 21st president of Liberia from 1986 until 1990. Samuel was a master sergeant who actually led a military coup in April of 1980, which killed the then president, William R. Tolbert Jr. He ended up being quite a corrupt and totalitarian president and only got more and more repressive as time went on. In 1989, a civil war started in Liberia when rebels entered. In September of 1990, Samuel was captured by the rebels as well as a former ally of his, Charles Taylor. In order to prove that Samuel was not protected by black magic, they started by cutting his ears off first. There are some pretty gruesome details that happen after, as he was tortured for 12 hours, which was recorded before they eventually killed him. The last words that Samuel spoke were those that one of his captors told him to say, were that the government is overthrown. I am therefore asking the armed forces to surrender to Field Marshal Prince Johnson. Prince Johnson being the one behind this coup. I honestly just can't think of a worse way to go, so this story really freaks me out. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the 18th President of the United States, Ulysses S. Grant. I am certainly no American political expert, but by what I read about Ulysses Grant, he seemed to be a pretty alright guy. His death came on July 23rd, 1885, after he lost his battle with throat cancer. His last spoken word was water, which is pretty sad considering what he was going through. But he did lose the ability to speak sometime before his death, so a more accurate portrayal of his last words would be something he wrote shortly before he passed. He wrote, "There was never one more willing to go than I." That is so dark and sad to think that he was just kind of done with life. But after suffering a painful disease, I can understand why. He certainly lived quite the life as he made it all the way to being the president. He was only 63 at the time, but I feel like by 1885 standards, that might have been pretty old. Heading on down to number 9, we have the 20th President of the United States, James Garfield. James had a similar outlook to a lot of people at the time and thought that the assassination of Abraham Lincoln was just a fluke and denied the opportunity to have security guards around him constantly. Unfortunately, on July 2nd, 1881, this decision led to him getting shot twice by a man who was trying to assassinate him. James lived for a few months after, but was struggling pretty hard to survive because of the lack of medical technology available to remove the bullet that was still lodged in him. On the day of his death, James lay down to rest before he awoke, clutching his chest. His friend, General David Swaim, was by his side, and James reached out for him and asked, "Swaim, can't you stop this pain?" These were his final words, and it's so sad to know that he passed in such pain, but I'm glad he had his friend near to him at the time. In our number 8 spot today, we have the 21st President of the United States, Chester Alan Arthur. Before I dive into this one, guys, please don't forget to hit that thumbs up because it really helps us out. Chester was actually the 20th Vice President, but became the 21st President after the death of James Garfield. After his presidency was finished, Chester went back to work at his New York law firm. He had some health issues already, so he wasn't working a ton, but on November 16th, 1885, he ordered for all of his personal and official papers to be burned, which seems like kind of weird behavior. The following day, he suffered a cerebral hemorrhage and never regained consciousness until he passed the next day. While Chester's last words weren't officially recorded, a friend of his said that his last words to him were that life is not worth living. This is a pretty dark message to leave someone, but maybe Chester didn't know that this was the last time that he would speak to this friend. In our number 7 spot, we have the 22nd and the 24th President of the United States, Grover Cleveland. Grover has not been regarded as a particularly great president, and it has been said that his greatest accomplishment might have been the introduction that he gave so that the more modern presidency that began with Theodore Roosevelt could emerge. In the fall of 1907, Grover fell very ill, and in 1908, he ended up suffering a heart attack. On June 24th, 1908, he ended up passing away with his last words being, "I have tried so hard to do right." I think this is pretty dark because it's sad to think that he was worried about the impact he had left on the world in his final moments. Death really does seem like the worst time to start having an existential crisis. In our number 6 spot, we have the 23rd President of the United States, Benjamin Harrison. Benjamin was actually the grandson of the 9th President, making them the only grandfather-grandson duo to have both held office. He was a Republican who took office in between the terms of Grover Cleveland and lost out on re-election. He definitely isn't ranked among the top or best presidents, but his commitment and his integrity are not questioned. Benjamin had an interesting personal life, considering after his wife passed, he remarried, but it just so happens that the woman he chose was the 37-year-old niece and former secretary of his late wife. In February of 1901, Benjamin was diagnosed with influenza, which at the time was called grip. He was treated the best way that they knew how at the time, but on March 13th, at the age of 67, he ended up passing away. What the doctors had thought was influenza was actually pneumonia, which was the cause of his death. His last words were, "Are the doctors here? Doctor, my lungs." It's super sad to know that he was in pain, and I'm not sure if they knew what pneumonia was in 1901, but if they did, it would be such a shame that he was misdiagnosed and mistreated. Pneumonia isn't fun even in 2020 when we have better ways of treating it. In our 5th spot and halfway mark, we have the 32nd President of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt. Franklin still holds the record for the longest time in office, as he was elected 4 consecutive times. Of course, this was before the 2-term limit that now exists. Franklin is regarded as one of the best presidents there's ever been, but of course there have been plenty of people who criticized his policies and positions, but also because of the fact that he was the president for most of World War II, his response to that was also highly scrutinized. Franklin was able to serve 3 terms entirely and was 2 months and 23 days into his 4th term when he passed. On April 12th of 1945, Franklin was sitting for a portrait when he said, "I have a terrific headache." He then slumped over in his chair, and upon examination by his...
Whatever you do it for less at Harbor Freight.
his attending cardiologist, he ended up passing away from an intracerebral hemorrhage. It's crazy to think that he had no idea what he was just seconds away from, and that he really did just think he had a headache. I guess maybe that's a good way to go though. I feel really bad for the guy that was doing the portrait because I feel like that would be very awkward. In our number 4 spot, we have the 34th President of the United States, Dwight D. Eisenhower. Dwight was a 5-star general in the Army during World War II before he became president. Dwight has been seen as an inactive president, but some things that he has been praised for are ending the Korean War and not starting any others in the meantime, and for stabilizing the Soviet-American rivalry. On March 28, 1969, Dwight ended up passing away at the Walter Reed Army Medical Center from congestive heart failure. He was 78 at the time, and his last words ended up being, "I want to go, God take me." I guess it's a good thing that he felt ready when it came time, but it is pretty scary to think that he had just kind of given up. Maybe his time in the war gave him some memories that he just didn't want to have anymore. Coming in at our number 3 spot, we have the 35th President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. The Kennedy family is one of the most politically established families in American history. John is highly regarded as a great president and actually came 3rd in a list of highly admired people of the 20th century. John and his wife were slightly younger than their predecessors, which gave them this sort of pop culture influence as well as their obviously political influence. On Friday, November 22nd, 1963 at 12:30 p.m., John was assassinated as he was traveling in a presidential motorcade throughout downtown Dallas, Texas. He ended up being struck by 2 bullets and was immediately taken to hospital, where he was pronounced dead 30 minutes later. While I don't have time to go into who assassinated him or why, I will tell you that his last words were to a woman named Nellie Connolly, who was traveling in the same car as him. She had said to him, "You certainly can't say that the people of Dallas haven't given you a warm welcome, Mr. President," to which he replied, "No, you certainly can't." It's crazy because they very obviously had no idea about what was just moments away from happening, but I'm glad that it seems like he was feeling welcomed and well loved before this tragic incident took place. Moving on to our number 2 spot, we have the 36th President of the United States, Lyndon B. Johnson. Lyndon was the vice president to John F. Kennedy, but took over the presidency after the assassination we just talked about. When Lyndon first held office, he was looked down upon and had some pretty low ratings. Since then, however, he has began to become regarded as an above-average president, and some of the policies he put in place still exist and remain intact today. Lyndon shocked America when he decided not to run for a second term, but it was because he was worried about his health and being unable to make it all the way through. Lyndon had a bunch of heart problems and suffered 2 heart attacks. Surgery was considered for him, but doctors weren't sure he was healthy enough to be able to survive it. On January 22nd, 1973, Lyndon called for help on his telephone as he was suffering another massive heart attack. His last words were, "Send Mike immediately." Mike was his Secret Service agent who was housed not too far from where Lyndon was, but by the time Mike got there, it was already too late. I hate the idea that he died alone, but he lived a good life and accomplished a lot before his passing. And even if Mike was there, the outcome most likely wouldn't have been any different. In our number 1 spot today, we have the 37th President of the United States, Richard Nixon. Richard has quite the reputation for his second term due to the rise of Watergate, and was the only president who resigned from the position. There is a lot to unpack about Richard's second term, and we'll honestly have to save that for another video, but we will skip to what you're here for. On April 18th, 1994, Richard unfortunately suffered a stroke. He was awake and alert for a while, but unable to speak. Because of the trauma his brain had suffered, he ended up slipping into a coma before he passed away on April 22nd. Before the stroke, his last words were to his housekeeper, and all he said was help. It's really scary to know that he knew something bad was happening to him, but it really is even scarier to have been awake and unable to speak for the rest of the time after that. Luckily, when he did end up passing, he was 81 years old, and he had his daughters by his side so that they could tell him that they loved him and say their goodbyes.
Kicking off the list at number 10, Sir Isaac Newton. Alright, yeah, we'll start this list off back in the early 1700s. Why not? Let's start crying back in the olden days. Sir Isaac Newton lived until he was 80, and back in the 1700s, living until you're 80, why, that's practically unheard of, right? That's insane. Newton started to experience digestion issues, but come 1727, he blacked out and never woke up again. The man died at 84. His last words were sad, of course, as are all of these on this very sad list that I'm doing, in a hopefully not sad way. But they go as follows. I don't know what I may seem to the world, but as to myself, I seem to have only been like a boy playing on the seashore and diverting myself now and then and finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than the ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me. What exactly that means, let's all talk about it in the comments. Let's try and decipher that. There we go. Number 9, John F. Kennedy. A little more recent, jumping to the 1960s, President John F. Kennedy was killed while riding in a motorcade. We all know this one, of course. I don't have to go into grim detail about what happened here. He was riding alongside his wife, of course, First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy, and in front of him there was Texas Governor John Connally and his wife Nellie. They were all rolling along when Nellie said to John, "You certainly can't say that the people of Dallas haven't given you a nice welcome." The president then said back, "No, I certainly can't." And just moments later, that's when he met his fate. Number 8, Alfred Hitchcock. This man went out with a zinger. Classic, what a classic drama queen. Alfred Hitchcock worked alongside famous painters and literary figures throughout history. He's an icon. He teamed up with Cary Grant, Jimmy Stewart, Dorothy Parker, you name it. In his 1945 film Spellbound, Alfred even brought on Salvador Dali, like the real Salvador Dali, to help him with the film's dream sequences, right? He had a vision, he knew what he was doing. He also terrified many people for years to come. It's also a fun one. Hitchcock is known for going great lengths to keep his endings a secret, like Psycho, for example, a 1960s classic. The ad department for the film told audiences to please not give away the ending, as it's the only one they have. That's fun, that's cute. Weirdly mirrors his last words in real life. As he was dying, Alfred said, "One never knows the ending. One has to die to know exactly what happens after death. Although Catholics have their hopes." That sounds very Alfred Hitchcocky. Number 7, Steve Jobs. A little more modern, there we go. When I was making this list, I couldn't believe how long it's been since Steve Jobs has passed away. It's been a while. The tech icon's last moments were in 2011. He was surrounded with love. He had beside him his sister Patty, his children, and his partner Lorene. Steve looked above them and said, "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow." He said "oh wow" 3 times. That's pretty heavy stuff to hear. Steve's last moments were shared furthermore when his sister wrote in his eulogy, "Even now he had a stern, still handsome profile, the profile of an absolutist, a romantic." Number 6, Nostradamus. I predict that you'll hit that thumbs up. That's inappropriate, but we try our best. The astrologer's last words were in itself predictions. And this last prediction he sadly got right. Nostradamus, full name Michel de Nostradam, published a book on prophecies back in 1555, and in it he had 942 pieces of writing. He had these poems that told the future, right? These texts have supposedly hinted towards the JFK attack, meteors hitting Earth, the invasion of France, global warming, you name it. He said some eerie things about such topics, and he also predicted his own death. On paper, he did. It was his last ever prediction. It was July 1st, 1566. His priest said to him, "Until tomorrow," and Nostradamus replied, "You will not find me alive at sunrise." Sadly, he was correct. Number 5, Beethoven. Another icon, another staple in history, the German composer Ludwig van Beethoven. We've recently heard his work in theaters. In Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, Doctor Strange fights the villain with musical notes. He uses these notes. He uses Beethoven's Symphony No. 5 in C minor. Now we've heard Beethoven in IMAX, right? What a time to be alive. When Ludwig was still alive, he faced many health problems. Hepatitis, jaundice, skin diseases, cirrhosis of the liver, and of course, deafness. When his time came on March 26, 1827, the composer was believed to have said, "Applaud, my friends, the comedy is over." This is false. This is not true at all. Beethoven's close friend, Anselm Hüttenbrenner, who was very much present during his friend's passing, he said his last words were about the case of red wine that had just been delivered from his publisher. Ludwig's true last words followed, and they were, "Pity, pity, too late." About the wine. Fair. More than fair. It was a little too late. Number 4, Marie Antoinette. Another older one, but I figured I'd go more Victorian for this list, you know? Instead of like recent celebrities, that's only depressing. We don't want to talk about those. During the height of the French Revolution, Louis XVI of France and Marie Antoinette were both charged with treason. The phrase, "let them eat cake," is often associated with Mrs. Antoinette in this case, but her last words were actually an apology. Not to the people in which they owed it to, but to the executioner whose foot she stepped on whilst approaching the guillotine. Yeah, shows like Game of Thrones make it look easy to say something cool right before your, demise. In reality, I would beg for my life. Looking up at this dude, yeah, I would plea. I'd be like, please don't do this. I really don't want this to happen. Number 3, Bob Marley. Of course, we have to mention the one and only reggae legend, Bob Marley, okay? Cancer was the reason that this icon met his fate early. The big C, once again. Marley was only 36 years old when he passed away in 1981. Next to him, he had his son Ziggy, and to him he shared the final words. And I think we could all learn a little something here. He said to Ziggy, "Money can't buy life." Yeah, I'll say that again. Money can't buy life. Not happiness, life. Bob Marley's death was so impactful that the Jamaican government turned this sad day into a national holiday. Yeah, that's a great idea. Live some more of that life. Take the day off. Blast some Marley and, you know the rest. Stuff I can't talk about, light some candles, right? That's an ideal way to mourn somebody as impactful as Bob Marley. I'm here for it.
I just got a link to track a delivery. Did you get me a birthday gift?
Yeah. I'd Genie that.
Why?
I forgot your birthday, that's not for me.
Download Norton Genie to quickly find out if an email, text, or website is a scam.
Sorry.
It's fine.
Number 2, Giles Corey. Out of the 27 people who had their lives taken away from them during the 1692 Salem witch trials, 19 were hanged, 17 passed away in prison while serving their sentence, and the last victim, Giles Corey, refused to plead either innocent or guilty. And the law at the time states that you can't be tried otherwise, so he did what was ultimately best for him and his family and his estate. The townsfolk laid a heavy board on top of the 81-year-old man during the witch trials and all that nonsense, and then over the course of 2 days, boulders were slowly added, making the weight more and more unbearable. They were hoping that Giles would admit something, either being innocent or guilty, whatever the case, but every time they asked him anything, Giles responded with, "More weight." How epic is that? Extremely brave. This is something like, it sounds easy, but in reality, I would never do this. I would fold immediately. I would be like, this is so hard. But sadly, after 2 days of this torture, Giles passed away. He fought for so long and did what he could because if he had gone either of the other 2 ways, Giles would have his property taken away from the town. But since he passed away not admitting guilt, he was still in full possession of his estate, which immediately went to his son-in-law. And finally, number 1, Robin Williams. Okay, I wanted to end on one that really hit home for me personally. I try and bring comedy into these lists whenever I can. It's like, cursed dolls that will haunt your family. I'm like, okay, I try and jazz it up a bit. I try and add some physicality to it whenever I can, brighten the mood. Because I was raised watching this man right here. Robin sadly passed away in August 2014. I was 19 at the time. I still remember the day, right? It was the first celebrity death that actually did something to me physically. And I don't mean for that to sound sensitive, but I grew up with this man, right? He was like Hook, Aladdin, robots, so underrated, right? Robin's wife, Susan Schneider Williams, revealed her husband's last words in an interview with ABC. And when the couple was getting ready for bed the night before, his last words were, "Good night, good night." Yeah, I wanted to end on a nice, good, peaceful note instead of something horrible from the 1700s. There we go.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have Michael Ney. Michael Ney was a first duke, and he was the first prince of the Moskva, and was a French military commander in the French Revolutionary Wars, as well as the Napoleonic Wars. He was even one of the original 18 marshals of the empire that Napoleon I created. After Napoleon was dethroned and exiled in 1815, however, Michael was arrested and tried by the Chamber of Peers for treason. When the verdict was given, 137 peers voted for the death penalty, 17 voted for deportation, 5 abstained, and there was 1 single vote for acquittal. Unfortunately, this was a majority rules situation, and Michael was sentenced to death by the firing squad. On December 7th, 1815, Michael was put in front of a firing squad, and he refused to wear a blindfold. He was surprisingly given the right to order the fire himself, and before doing so, these are the final words that he spoke. "Soldiers, when I give the command to fire, fire straight at my heart. Wait for the order. It will be my last to you. I protest against my condemnation. I have
Yo, brother,
fought
man, I'm
100 battles
finna
for
sign off.
France
I'm gonna jump
and
back on
not
later on
one
tonight though.
against her."
It's cold
soldiers,
as shit
fire.
downhill.
I couldn't
I did my
imagine
morning
having
joint
to
already. I'm
be
gonna
the
do my
one
later
to
morning.
order your own death.